Chapter 577. First, they saw a dog. Then they saw a truck. Finally, everyone saw a dog pulling a truck and flying in the sky. A wolfhound and a truck were flying in the sky at an incomparably fast speed. Wherever they passed, a deep crack was plowed through the dark clouds. It was as if the ocean was opening up from both sides. Under the illumination of the setting sun, it was as if Santa Claus had descended. The atmosphere was incomparably dreamy. If it wasn't for the bloody rain that kept splashing down from the truck and the driver who didn't look like a good person, it would be as if they had come to a fairy tale world. But this had nothing to do with Liz. Even if the door to heaven opened at this time, and a real saint flew out with small wings and a halo above his head to sing praises, he wouldn't be able to stop her attack. Even if the world was destroyed in the next moment, she would definitely cut off this bastard's head. If the world was destroyed in half an hour, she would turn this bastard's bones into ashes. She could even spend some effort to grind his skull into a wine cup. No matter what, there was only one thing that wouldn't change. Why sure must I? In that instant, Why sure, who was lying on the ground, suddenly collapsed. Countless afterimages split off from his body and flew in all directions. However, before the afterimages could spread out, they jumped into a meat grinder one after another and were torn into pieces. Even Why sure, who was in the middle of Shadow Burial's teleportation, lost his target and was forcibly squeezed out of the teleportation and floated in the air. Then he saw the blade of a sword that was close at hand. The heavy Teutonic greatsword in the hands of Captain Everly had been raised. It was simply erected in the air, like a tree stump, waiting for a rabbit to crash into it. Now, Whisher felt that he was that stupid rabbit that was easily forced into a dead end. He didn't even see what had happened. When he reacted, it was already too late. Ignoring the pain caused by the afterimages being torn apart, Whisher forcefully activated Shadow Burial's teleportation at the last moment and appeared dozens of meters away in a sorry state. He felt a chill in his chest. He didn't even need to look to know that AI Fooley's heavy sword had pierced a huge hole in the ground. Poisonous blood light spread from the hole and burned the bone, burying sacred ground until it sizzled. Then he realized he actually returned to his original position. He returned to Liz's stone sword. There were paths in all directions, but when AI fully stood there, everything became a hopeless situation. There was only a simple choice left. If he walked forward, there would be a sword waiting for him. If he walked backward, there would still be a sword waiting for him. But he could make a choice between them, or he could just stand there stupidly and choose to take them all. This almost crushing and terrifying suppression made Whisher feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. The Tier 4 power easily guided his reaction, turning him into a puppet in the palm of his hand, allowing him to be toyed with. But at least he still had the final choice. In that instant, Whisher stepped forward. He pulled out the sacrificial knife from the falling stone-tooth sword. Xiang Dragon. A resounding sound burst forth at this moment. Intense light intersected, and the roar of steel overlapped. It was hard to count how many collisions there were at this moment. Only the sharp sound ravaged everyone's eardrums. The raging stone-tooth sword paused and was actually repelled. Liz took a step back. Whisher wanted a moment to catch his breath, even if it was only for a moment, because AI Fully had already caught up from behind him. He took a step forward and stepped on Whisher's shadow, just like a prisoner stepping on a wooden stake to be beheaded. He raised the Teuton heavy sword in his hand and aimed it at Whisher's neck from afar. He swept it horizontally, and in front of Whisher, the stone-toothed sword screeched again and stabbed straight at Whisher. After a short moment to catch his breath, there was still no chance of survival, but he still managed to win this crucial moment. The sharp sound of a horn was suddenly heard. In the sky, countless trucks roared as they swooped down amidst the artillery fire. It was pulled by the mosaic wolfhound and suddenly drifted. The cumbersome armor on the truck was thrown off, revealing the cannon hidden inside. Flames burst out. The blazing alchemy bomb had locked onto Iverson's position and flew towards the narrow door of the hangar. It could be expected that once it exploded in the hangar, it would cause heavy losses. The chopping of the heavy sword paused for an insignificant moment. because Iverson pulled out a dagger from his waist and threw it towards the sky without raising his head. A simple dagger without any special features flew out from his hand. The sound of the explosion was so low that white waves spread out. The dagger that was thrown out was already above the speed of sound. It emitted a blazing light in the high-speed friction. The alchemy bomb in the air suddenly paused and was thrown in half from the middle. Then a terrifying explosion spread in the air. But the explosion was also torn apart. The dagger flew out of the flames and penetrated the driver's seat window with irresistible force. It tore the driver's seat and nailed into the car with a buzzing sound. Under the driver's seat, Raymond curled up and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. The sword is not old yet, teacher. At the moment when Iverson made his move, the blood-red flame finally rose from under his armor and formed a lifelike, ferocious projection behind him. It was as if an evil god had come here and trampled on heaven and earth. Indian genealogy, 8 dragons. 4th order Jura. He was not heaven, who was intoxicated in killing. Raymond's dangerous attack only had time to delay Huaishur for less than a second. But Huaishur suddenly had a kind of joy of escaping from a desperate situation. In the tearing pain in his chest, Huaishur looked up and studied the angry girl in front of him. She must have never been so angry. One had a superior who inherited the noble blood of the gods, a noble high priest, a dignified and serious warrior, suffered such humiliation. Even if Huaishur lay on the ground and begged for mercy, she would never listen, because this humiliation could only be washed away with blood. Then I'll give you my blood. Facing the screech of the stone-toothed sword, Huaishur loosened his 10 fingers, put down the weapon in his hand, and took a step forward. There was no resistance. He allowed it to pass through his chest, through the crack made by Iverson's heavy sword, through the hole in Huaishur's chest, and protruded from his back. Flames erupted from the stone-toothed sword, burning away the blood left by Iverson and burning Huaishur's body. And the two were already close to each other. Huaishur could even see his own reflection in Liz's dilated pupils. In this fleeting moment of astonishment, he lowered his head and whispered in Liz's ear, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said just now." He raised his arms and hugged Liz's shoulders. But in the interval of this ear-piercing beat, Huaishur held her waist and suddenly flipped when his feet crossed, like the dance steps in the tango, switching positions, blocking Liz in front of Iverson's blade. The sure-kill blade came to an abrupt halt. Then, in the sound of iron chains rubbing against each other, a pitch-black chain flew out from Huaishur's fingertips. It went up his left hand and wrapped around Liz's right hand that held the sword, binding the two together. Huaishur said, "Parting is always sad, isn't it?" In that instant, the rope of sorrow was activated. Indescribable sadness and desolation accompanied by the seal of the source substance and the suppression of the sacred mark rose from Liz's heart. The chain had already drilled into her body and tightly bound the sacred mark. It caused the left hummingbird that symbolized the god of war to fall into the cage. No matter how violent the sacred mark was, no matter how quickly she welcomed the collapse, the furious source substance and the power of resistance were being rapidly extracted. Anger was useless, and pain could not change the fact. "Before parting, why don't you dance with me, my lady?" Close to the girl's cheek, Huaishur smiled and led her arm, guiding the young girl to step out of the dance step to the left and turn around. The low beat was played with the crisscrossing of the footsteps, moving forward in the roar of gunfire around them. Huaishur's arm swung and threw out the cards in his pocket. In the tide of crows, 9 ferocious giant shadows walked out of the torn cards, raised their steel-covered faces, raised the weapons in their hands towards the enemies in front of them, and pulled the trigger. The boiling iron light spewed out, intertwined with each other, and broke through the blockade of the Ivy League. "This is your plan?" Liz raised her eyes, and her green eyes stared indifferently at Huaishur. "You can't bind me for long, and you can't delay Iverson. Huaishur, you can't escape." But Huaishur did not answer. He just smiled and hummed softly in the low beat. I feel like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, pressurito break or retreat at every turn. I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. Am I going to be crushed, or am I going to retreat? The insignificant song was torn apart. Azura raised his cold eyes and stared indifferently at Huaishur. Iverson took a step forward and pulled out a short sword from the sheath of his subordinate beside him. Holding it in both hands, he walked towards Huaishur step by step and easily cut the guards in front of him into pieces. In front of him, Huaishur had no way to escape. But Huaishur was still retreating, because a loud sound came from the sky. It was a mosaic wolfhound, blocking in front of Iverson, raised its head, and looked at the incarnation of the demonic god in front of it. The mosaic body suddenly expanded rapidly. In a flash, it turned into a monster that covered the sky, spread out a huge pair of wings made of countless squares, and roared loudly. Dragon's breath was spewed. The fire spread and swept across. It echoed in Huaishur's low humming. Facing the fear that the truth has been discovered, no telling Gao, all the will to work out. I found the truth in the face of fear. No one tells you where the road is, because there is no road to go. The sound of the chain breaking continued. Even if they were both third order, the rope of sorrow could no longer suppress left hummingbird stigmata. Huaishur had retreated to the edge of the outer deck, and behind him was the endless dark sea of clouds. One more step forward, and it would be hell, and he would be smashed to pieces in the fall. How tragic! Huaishur sighed softly, looked down at the girl who was about to break free, and suddenly asked, "Why don't we die together?" Liz was unmoved and just stared at him indifferently. But Huaishur let go of her and hugged her for the last time before she regained her freedom. "I'm kidding." He smiled. "Sorry, if you can't forgive me, come to me. At that time, I will have a fair fight with you, and I won't run away again." As if there was still a future left for him, he said such a solemn goodbye. He took a step back. Humming a vague tune, he fell straight to hell. I am looking for freedom, in search of freedom. A hurricane rose from behind, and freedom and death came at the same time, drawing an end to this restless performance. In the fall, he finally felt the late pain and dizziness. Thick blood flew out from the crack in his chest, merged into the wind, and turned into wisps of blood color that spread. In the distant sky, the truck finally turned back again. With a rocket-like exhaust flame at the tail, it sped toward Huaishur, penetrating the airship's gunfire, and desperately wanted to catch him. But then it shook violently. The flame spread. The side of the car suddenly caved in. It was hit, and the flight trajectory suddenly deviated. Raymond's truck flew past Huaishur's body, and he didn't have time to catch him. They passed by each other. Huaishur could even hear Raymond's angry roar. The door of the passenger seat was suddenly pushed open, and a figure jumped out recklessly. Pulling on the safety rope, he threw himself at Huaishur and slammed into her. Huaishur tumbled in the air and fell into the abyss. The fall came to an abrupt end. "Teacher!" In the hurricane, someone shouted and grabbed his wrist tightly. Huaishur looked up and saw a familiar touch of gray and the pink piggy graffiti on the edge of the helmet. It was Yuan Yuan. Huaishur breathed a sigh of relief and forced a smile. Finally safe. But then, through the helmet's mask, Huaishur saw the girl's eyes. It was dark, and she was looking at him. Quietly, she asked softly, "You just said that the child in the woman's belly. What's going on?" Huaishur froze in the air. He felt the crisis of death engulfing him. It turned out to be a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. That's great. 10 minutes later, in the emergency room at the back of the truck, Yuan Yuan cleaned Huaishur's wound with a smile and scraped off the broken flesh. "Teacher, you don't need to say anything. I understand. Teacher, you are so upright. How could you do such a shameless thing outside?" Lying on the operating table, Huaishur stared dumbfoundedly at Yuan Yuan, who was waving the scalpel in front of her chest. She wanted to say something, but stopped herself. "Girl, my liver is fine. You don't need to cut it, forget it. Yuan Yuan is so cute. It's just a liver, not a kidney. Let her practice." Lin Shurjiu shivered next to him, as if he felt something hidden under Yuan Yuan's smile. He didn't dare to speak at all. If he were a woman, would he have been killed? He inexplicably thought so. Teacher, you should be more careful in the future. Yuan Yuan bowed her head and stitched, saying casually, such rumors are very harmful to girls. Even if you are anxious, you have gone too far. Yes, yes, that's right. Huaisher nodded frantically. He couldn't wait to get up and kowtow to Yuan Yuan. Let's get over this quickly and not mention this again, especially the knife in his student's hand, intentionally or unintentionally, was always pointing at his neck. It was a little unbearable. Chapter 578. 2 minutes later, Huaisher crawled up from the operating table and looked down at his chest. He could actually see the operating table behind him. It was a very strange feeling. The wound in his chest had actually been opened up. Wind blew in from outside the broken carriage, blowing past his body. It felt exceptionally cool. Luckily, he was at the 3rd tier. Otherwise, Huaisher would have been on his knees a long time ago. Being able to experience the benefits of being at the 3rd tier in a place like this was completely out of Huaisher's expectations. Before his internal organs gradually became etherified, no matter how tough his life was, he would never be able to break free from the basic life cycle and limits. Now, under the influence of the young arbiter of life stigmata, the etherification of Huaisher's internal organs had actually progressed quite a bit. After being stabbed in the chest, he was stabbed in the chest again. Many of his vital organs had been shattered, and even half of his lungs were left, but he was still able to breathe. However, the price he had to pay was that the divine light of grace in his hand had shrunk by a large margin. The most troublesome part wasn't the wound, but rather the damage from the origin substances attached to the 2 weapons. The bloody light left behind by the Azura and the raging flames from the first sun. If it weren't for the fact that the young arbiter of life's divinity had given him a bit of resistance against high-tier origin substances, he probably would have been reduced to a puddle of blood or burnt to a crisp by now. The silver lining was that the 2 of them had already started fighting amongst themselves before they had killed Huaisher. In the end, they had left behind a mess and were unable to do much. After Huaisher had used Shadow Burial once, he had been squeezed into a puddle of blood and sparks and thrown off. After removing the broken bones and cleaning the wound, Huaisher finally rummaged through his saddlebag for a long time and found the 2 vials of silver blood medicine's high-tier medicine, the ancient blood. The translucent, blood-red liquid fell into the wound under the careful control of the dropper, quickly adhering to the broken parts of the internal organs. It quickly grew, mended, and formed a complete outline. The originally dormant medicine was awakened by Huaisher's origin substance and merged into Huaisher's body. Like countless living cells, it regenerated the damaged internal organs. Even though Huaisher had a good understanding of its principles, he was still stunned by the scene in front of him. Huaisher didn't know if it was because of the bombardment or because of the strong airflow, but the truck shook violently again. His hand trembled, and he dropped a drop of medicine in the wrong place. When he came to his senses, he realized that he seemed to have 2 appendices. For this kind of thing, one more or one less shouldn't matter, right? He hesitated for a moment, then reached in and pulled one of them off. For a moment, he couldn't tell which one was his original form. However, as long as he spent a little more time, the medicine would gradually be metabolized, and the brand new internal organs would be equivalent to the original goods. There was no need to be so particular about it. Just make do with it. The ancient blood could regenerate internal organs and heal wounds, but the only drawback was that it would consume a large amount of origin substance. Thankfully, they had the origin substance that they had obtained from the Ivy League's vault. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hold on. Under the intense shaking, Huaisher didn't have time to carefully treat his wounds. He gulped down a few vials of origin substance, barely recovering half of his HP. Then, he leaned against the wall and walked towards the driver's cabin. Why are you shaking so much? He hadn't even finished asking. After leaving the cabin, which was enveloped by the depth-balancing instrument, his vision went black, and he almost fell out of the cabin. He felt as if he had entered a washing machine. He was once again engulfed by the nightmarish experience of the old driver's rapid advancement. Huaisher's hands quickly grabbed onto the door frame. Immediately afterwards, he felt himself spinning rapidly and losing his balance. It was as if someone had tied a rope around his waist, and the other end was connected to a death roller coaster with no end in sight. Puff! He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Are you driving a truck or a centrifuge? Have you ever seen a truck flying in the sky? Raymond, who was in the driver's seat, roared without turning his head. He turned the steering wheel fiercely and stepped on the gas pedal to the max. The entire truck actually tilted up in the air and did a cobra maneuver. However, no matter how one looked at it, it looked like a wooden club tilting up its head. It was only then that Huaisher saw the gray world that was quickly turning upside down outside the driver's cabin. In the dim yellow sky and dark clouds, as well as dozens of shadows that flashed across the sky, and even in the rearview mirror, the salamanders were like dancing giant fireballs as they chased closely behind. That scale was simply overwhelming, and at the end of the sky behind him, he actually saw the huge outline of the airship slowly appear. On the dashboard, the alarms that represented the radar's lock-on and impact warning blared crazily, rising and falling one after another. What the hell? Huaisher's vision went black, and he couldn't believe it. Didn't I just escape from prison? Did they have to bring the spring water directly to mess with me? You wish. Raymond rolled his eyes. How much fuel do you think such a large-scale operation would burn every second? Just for you. Did they have to go that far? The vicious screeching of flying birds suddenly came from the front. 2 live bombs with wings soared in the sky and swooped down toward the truck. Immediately after, they exploded in the air under the machine gun's fire. The flames spread, and hurricanes and high heat swept across. The chaotic airflow pushed, pulled, and hit the body of the truck like a tide, making it look like a leaf drifting in the wind. At this time, Huaisher was particularly glad that there was no fluid dynamics in hell. Otherwise, the truck would have fallen head first. How could it be like now, with a rocket thruster plugged in, flying in the sky like an airplane? Just as he breathed a sigh of relief through the glass, he once again saw that the huge airship in the distance had come closer. At the top of the airship, the airbag that was as huge as the sun's will slowly opened, and countless aircraft rose from it like a flock of birds. Like a tide, they advanced toward this place. Under the dim light of the setting sun, a scarlet color appeared on the dark wings, as if they were stained with blood. The blood-red birds let out a steely roar and gathered into a complicated formation under the roar of the engine. Wave after wave rose into the sky, surrounding and protecting the airship. Even the vast sea of dark clouds below was disturbed by this massive formation. Dozens of ferocious black tornadoes rose from the clouds, rising into the sky like pillars. In the grand sound of the siren, the tornadoes rapidly expanded and shattered. Huge monsters emerged from them, spreading their wings, resisting the pull of the earth, and soared between heaven and earth. A chill suddenly engulfed Huaisher. Compared to the iron-gray tide, the truck that was fleeing for its life in front could not even be considered a dinghy. Now, how could he be so arrogant as to think that the Ivy League, which had gone bankrupt in one wave, was chasing after him? It was obvious that they had gambled everything to launch a decisive battle. After they escaped, not only did they not retreat, but they also broke into the Ivy League's route and got into the battle zone themselves. What the hell? Huaisher was stunned and incredulous. I was imprisoned for less than 2 weeks. What happened? There was a war, and a war. Raymond grinned and laughed strangely. All the sub-control centers have been excavated. Now is the decisive battle. Huaisher, welcome to the future world. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? What the hell? Huaisher's jaw almost fell to the ground. So fast. How many thousands of words did you omit? You bastard. Are you trying to scare me? Unfortunately, Mr. Huaisher, although Mr. Raymond told you a lot of lies, there is no problem with this sentence. The purser's voice came from the radio. Now that we are in a decisive battle with the Ivy League, I have to express my gratitude for your outstanding contribution. Your jailbreak has reduced the logistics of the Ivy League by at least 16%, giving us a huge advantage in the early stages of preparation. I hope you can continue to work hard in the next stage. I risked my life to escape from prison. I didn't even get to enjoy the heat of the iron crystal base. And you want me to go to war? Huaishir was in disbelief. Even if I'm a tool, I need some time to cool down, right? The purser sighed. Look at you. You sound like you were a tool. Am I not a tool? You're the principal's secretary and the temporary person in charge of the iron crystal base. The purser answered seriously. You are much more noble than a tool. We are always looking forward to your presence in the headquarters. That's enough, old man. You should stop talking. Instead of staying in the iron crystal base as a decoration, you might as well be a tool. Huaishir rolled his eyes. Let's be simple and straightforward. Where are the enemies? How many are there? And how far are they from me? To be honest, I can't wait. It's great to see you so full of fighting spirit. The purser's tone became gratified. According to our surveillance lens, the closest enemy signal should be right in front of you, about 1 kilometer away. Since you're passing by, why don't you give them a final blow? Just treat it as a form of rehabilitation exercise. What? 1 kilometer? Huaishir was confused. He leaned against the car window and looked around. Where is it? Why can't I see it? Before he could finish his sentence, he saw that the gray cloud sea below was suddenly torn apart. The boiling clouds spread out, surrounded by lightning. Amidst the tragic screams, a huge body broke through the clouds. It waved its broken tentacles and rose into the sky as if it was crawling. However, the huge body was now covered in wounds. Its armor was broken. Even the dozens of thick tentacles were not intact. The intact eye was filled with countless blood vessels and madness. From the huge, scorched wound, dark green liquid was constantly squeezing out and dripping slowly like sticky rain. The gland implanted in the body of the chimera was secreting a large amount of hormones, making it reach out its tentacles and wrap them around the truck. It was a giant chimera covered with a thick shell. But now, it looked like an octopus that ran out of the kitchen grill. Why did the giant chimeras of the Ivy League always have a problem with seafood? Huaishir couldn't understand from the bottom of his heart, just like he couldn't understand why the Ivory Tower called this thing rehabilitation exercise. Therefore, his first reaction was to turn back and look at Raymond, full of hope. Bro, do you still have that cannon? 3 rounds of special explosive grenades. I used them when I saved you. Raymond looked at him with the same resentment. In order to reduce weight, I just threw away the other heavy equipment. Do you think there are still 2 machine guns? Then what are you waiting for? Huaishir looked at the huge shadow outside the window, and his face turned green. Run. Chapter 579. As Huaishir screamed, the truck that was speeding forward suddenly lowered its head and brushed past the tentacles that were waving at it. It narrowly passed under the giant octopus. The viscous liquid that dripped from the wound landed on the truck and sizzled. It instantly corroded a large area of color, revealing the ugly metal underneath. My car! Before Huaishir could finish his sentence, Raymond screamed as if he had lost his parents. My car! God damn it, it's going to be scrapped before the loan is paid off. It's fine that we were hit by someone in front of us, and we're being chased after. But what the hell is with disfigurement? Raymond was in so much pain that tears flowed down his face. He slammed the steering wheel hard and cursed. Where's the law? Where's the justice? Although he screamed as if he had been stabbed in the butt by Captain Everly's heavy sword, his body still stepped on the accelerator. He even opened the second-level acceleration valve and pulled it all the way to the end. 2 jets opened from the back of the truck again and spewed out flames. In an instant, the huge truck flew up from the clouds again like a monkey in the sky. It bypassed the 2 entangling tentacles and left all the pursuers behind. Before they could breathe a sigh of relief, they heard the angry roar of the synthetic biochemical beast. Its blood red, I stared at the truck. It was obvious that the warship had marked the truck as an enemy. Its priority was even above returning to the headquarters for maintenance. It didn't even care about maintenance and chased after them with its tentacles. More than a dozen tentacles suddenly spread out like a boatman's bamboo pole. They lightly tapped on the dark clouds, and ripples appeared on the clouds. The huge body that was as big as a building shot out against common sense. It chased after them relentlessly. With it leading the way, Huai Shi and the others became an eyesore. The aircraft that were cruising in the sky and even the dancing salamanders all shook and rushed towards the truck like a school of fish. In the truck's cab, the ear-piercing sirens were almost continuous and became sharper and sharper. F***, this is killing me. Raymond screamed. What did you do in their headquarters? Why are they looking at you as if you're Lao Wang next door? Why does it have to be me? Huai Shi retorted angrily. It could also be because they saw the traitor. Don't you think you've gone too far? How the F*** would I know? I just randomly picked something that wanted to take revenge on society. Who the hell knew that thing would be? Raymond suddenly paused and awkwardly looked away. Well, it's not impossible. I knew it. Huai Shi was immediately filled with righteous indignation. Bastard, hurry up and tell me what you stole. It's not even yours. Why are you in such a hurry? Raymond finally came to his senses and glared at the bastard who took advantage of him. Since we've already activated level 2 propulsion, those cripples won't be able to catch up to us. I won't ask what you did there, and don't pry into other people's privacy, okay? Huai Shi opened his mouth to speak. All right, everyone has their own dark history. Can you stop harping on it? No, know what? I'm also very miserable, okay? I've been wandering around hell for so many years, and I can't even find a place to refuel. It doesn't matter who you are. Shut up. Huai Shi's face was pale as he pointed to the front and screamed. Why are you talking so much? Hurry up and look at the road. Road? Look at the road. There's a speed limit in the sky. F***. Raymond had just looked ahead when he immediately screamed like Huai Shi. Endless darkness spread out in front of them. Then, from the darkness, a huge war chimera suddenly pounced out. It was the octopus that they had left far behind. What the hell is this? Raymond turned the steering wheel fiercely, as if he was about to pull it off. The entire truck swerved in the air and escaped the bloody mouth of the war chimera. It pressed against the tentacles of the war chimera and once again bypassed the crisis of death. But then they saw that the huge biochemical beast that they had left behind suddenly spread out all its tentacles and spat out a lump of black ink from its mouth. Then the ink wrapped around it, quickly shrank and disappeared. Above the clouds directly in front of them, a spot of darkness suddenly spread out and a distorted outline appeared. Then the huge biochemical beast jumped out and attacked them with its claws and fangs. This dog can teleport. Raymond even forgot to curse and subconsciously raised his foot to step on the brakes. But he heard Huai Shi's voice beside him. Don't stop, hit it. What the hell? Raymond couldn't understand, but out of trust in Huai Shi, he didn't relax his foot on the gas pedal. He rushed straight ahead, toward the huge octopus that was baring its fangs and fangs. What are you doing, brother? We're really going to die. Raymond was so anxious that he was almost speechless. But next to him, Huai Shi unfastened his seatbelt and waved his hand casually. Just drive, I'll think of a way. Hey, are you trying to take advantage of me? Before Raymond could react, a hurricane suddenly swept in from behind the open door and stuffed his mouth. Then, the door was suddenly closed under the pressure. Huai Shi, who was in the passenger's seat, had disappeared without a trace. In the terrifying hurricane, Huai Shi was almost instantly thrown to the back of the car. But the rope of sorrow pulled on the rearview mirror, and Huai Shi swayed violently in the wind. Suddenly, he jumped and flipped over onto the roof of the car. Under the dim light of the setting sun, the truck spewed out violent flames, as if it was driving above the grayish-black clouds, rushing toward the huge monster that was baring its fangs and fangs. Very good. That's it. Huai Shi talked to himself, but the moment his voice came out, it was swept behind by the hurricane. In the terrible airflow and cold, he slowly raised his body and stepped on the car. He stood firm and stared at the violent monster that was getting closer and closer. He reached out, clenched the heavy steel, and counted down. 5. The steel twisted under Huai Shi's feet, and the leather boots made a sound that couldn't bear the burden, and the stitches began to break. Then, Huaishir felt that he was welcoming the boiling. Along with the crazy beating of his heart, the hot blood rushed in his blood vessels, giving him the illusion that he was expanding. The rhythm of the drummer and Yu's steps overlapped, forming a rhythm that exceeded the limit. Huaishir's face was burning red. He raised his eyes, for a fishy wind blew in his face, and the stinky ink seemed to have some kind of poison, smelling like the internal organs of creatures. The huge biochemical beast had already opened its mouth, and countless tentacles danced, forming a tight seal under the calculation of the chip. It welcomed the prey into its cage. The single eye was blood-red. 3. In his hand, the heavy steel multiplied inch by inch, and in an instant, it extended like a knight's lance to a jaw-dropping length. A full 15 meters. But Huaishir's hand was not a lance. It was a hammer. The ferocious wolf head suddenly opened its eyes, opened its mouth, and roared in pain, wildly extracting Huaishir's origin substance and continuously accumulating it. The pain of 100,000 people was manifested here. 2. In that instant, the distance between the truck and the fusion beast had been reduced to a dangerous distance of 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer. But for both sides, 1 kilometer was just a short distance that passed in an instant. Compared to the huge fusion beast that stirred up the sea of clouds, the truck was just a withered leaf in the storm, unable to resist the huge shadow that enveloped it. But at that moment, the sonorous sound of steel suddenly burst forth. From the roof of the truck, in the torrent of wind, Huaishir's body suddenly shook, and he took a step forward, leaving a footprint on the heavy armor under his feet. Then, with the second step, the entire truck suddenly shook, shaking violently. And Huaishir madly sprinted forward. A series of sounds of steel twisting followed his footsteps forward, the ear-piercing sound spreading all the way to the front of the truck, and then the last loud sound exploded above Raymond's head. Boom! Huaishir had already rushed out of the truck. Leaping up, like a speck of dust rising from a withered leaf, he roared, broke through the wind, and went against the flow, breaking through all the turbulent torrents, and went up from the air, breaking away from the gravity of the earth. It was as if he was flying. It was above the blood-red eye. In an instant of astonishment, in the evaluation of the war chip, the danger rating belonging to this little bug began to rise crazily. The fusion beast twisted its body as if it wanted to retreat, but it was too late. In Huaishir's hand, the steel that set off sonic booms and white waves scattered out. The wolf head roared, and blazing flames suddenly spewed out from behind the hammer, like a volcanic eruption. It drew a ferocious arc and smashed down. 0. A moment of silence, as if eternity had frozen, only the ripples caused by the ravaged air when the hammer smashed down. But then, there was a sudden burst of tragic cries, and the tentacles all over the sky danced wildly. A huge gap suddenly appeared on the face of the fusion beast. Compared to its body, even if the hammer was extended to the limit, it was just an iron needle. But now, that small needle was like an axe, violently opening up a huge crack on its body with pure strength and steel. The body shattered, the bones shattered, and the blood turned into a torrent, gushing out. The sudden impact suddenly erupted. The fusion beast involuntarily flipped, tilted, and between the wriggling tentacles, a truck whistled past, like a fish nimbly jumping out of a fishing net. But it didn't have time to catch Huaishir. They were too far apart. The moment they passed, Huaishir waved his hand indifferently and fell down. Then he threw out the rope of sorrow and wrapped it around a tentacle. The hammer in his hand dissipated and turned into a heavy axe blade. And with the pull of the chain, his body flew up again, falling toward the broken crack on the face of the fusion beast. Passing through layers of alloy bones, the burning axe blade slashed into the deepest part of the darkness. Sparks flew, and a crack appeared on the artificial brain hidden in the deepest part of the fusion beast's body, the black box that weighed several tons. Then, with another swing of the axe, the crack crisscrossed, the steel shattered, and countless chips broke. Huaisher stretched out his hand, and suddenly threw an alchemy bomb the size of a head into the fusion beast. The alchemy fire was ignited. At that moment, everyone saw the flames spewing out from the fusion beast's eyes. There were also ferocious roars that spread in all directions. It was a pure bestial instinct that no machine, chips, or control program could restrain. It was an instinct that was cast from countless hormones and genes. In pain, the dying beast fell into madness. All the tentacles twitched crazily on the spot, sweeping across the sky, sweeping past the combat group and salamander behind it. Countless black smoke rose, and the aircraft quickly fell from the sky. After losing the control of the program, it had turned into a pure beast. Under the stimulation of death, its instincts were stimulated like never before, and it became extremely manic. With just a little guidance, it could cause huge damage. And when the combat aircraft of the Ivy League began to retreat in an emergency, they saw a figure appear on the head of the fusion beast. He smiled and waved at them. In his hand, the spear of compassion was slowly raised and suddenly pierced under his feet. It easily opened a crack between the flesh and the steel. It went deep into the brain, which was too small compared to its huge body and connected to the nerve plexus. The toxin spread. Through the steel that had turned into source matter, one could feel the manic bestial instinct and fear. "Oh, Dwerich, this seems to be smoking." Huaisher smiled and poured a handful of ash. It injected a philosophical question that enlightened the apathetic and enlightened the apathetic consciousness. How many floors could a bag of rice be carried? The crazy roar burst forth again, and then thick ink spread out of thin air, covering the entire octopus. It wrapped around Huaisher and disappeared without a trace. Then, the huge octopus appeared out of thin air a few kilometers away. Its tentacles waved wildly, attacking the aircraft and salamander beside it. More than 10 salamander could not dodge in time. They were violently wrapped up by the tentacles and stuffed into its mouth. Ignoring the crisscrossing firepower around it, the dying fusion beast attacked crazily, venting the huge anger in its heart that did not belong to it at all. What the hell? Raymond, who was in the truck, glanced at the rearview mirror, and his eyes almost popped out. Among the combat aircraft of the Ivy League, the octopus that was wrapped in chains was being pulled by Huaisher. It was crazily moving back and forth. The gigantic monster relied on its terrifying size and strength to easily wreak havoc. As Huaisher shouted excitedly, it spat out ink in the air without warning. It kept flashing, jumping, and escaping in one hit. It was as if it was riding a galloping horse. It moved freely in the siege of several fusion beasts and live bombs that filled the sky. In the end, after jumping out of the attack range of the Ivy League, it flashed crazily in the sky without any pattern. It actually ran further and further away. "Can you stop playing?" Raymond picked up the walkie-talkie and shouted, "We're almost there. Come back quickly." Amidst the chaotic electric current and the sound of the wind, there was a long silence. It was not until Raymond realized that something was wrong that there was an awkward response. "To be honest, I really want to come back, but this thing, it doesn't have a steering wheel." Huaisher shrugged. "I can't brake whenever I want to, you understand, right?" "What the hell?" Raymond was instantly dumbfounded. "So you flashed crazily all this time because you accidentally went overboard? Can you be any more ridiculous?" "Actually, I can really." Huaisher scratched his head, feeling the strange gravity and the rapidly approaching clouds. He finally hammered his palm and came to a conclusion. "This thing seems to be falling." Chapter 580. What did you say? Raymond's eyes widened, and he almost thought that he was hallucinating. Then he saw the dying behemoth convulsing violently. It no longer had the strength to maintain its huge weight in the air. Like a kite that had lost control, it swayed and fell toward the clouds. Toward the ground, the distance was too far, and Raymond couldn't catch up at all. He never thought that the person he saved after going through so much trouble and braving the rain of bullets would actually court his own death when he was about to reach the destination. In the increasingly rapid fall, Huaisher patted his head and suddenly asked, "What day is it today?" Raymond didn't know where Huaisher's brain circuit was. He was stepping on the accelerator to chase after Huaisher. He didn't expect Huaisher's skeleton to be so strange. Day? As soon as he finished speaking, he felt that he was going to be stupid. He couldn't understand. Do you Dongxia people choose a good day to jump off a building? Sunday, not bad. In the hurricane, Huaisher's final response came. Didn't you say we're almost there? Let the people below prepare. He pulled the chain and showed a happy smile. Because I'll be back like lightning, like a bolt of lightning. As the chain contracted, the tentacles of the chimera suddenly opened and pounced toward the iron-like clouds below, stirring up the hurricane. Falling down. In an instant, with the ripples of the sea of clouds, Huaisher had disappeared. What? Raymond looked at the shadow, left by Huaisher in shock. After a long time, he reacted, "No, you didn't even wear a helmet? There are so many curses on the ground. You're so brave." Lin Sergio, whose presence was getting weaker and weaker, finally mustered up the courage to interject. "I think the teacher might have just forgotten." Raymond took a deep breath and asked in the silence, "Then if we chase after him now, will we have time to collect his body?" The moment he fell into the clouds, a familiar coldness hit him in the face. That was the thick smell of water vapor and blood. The rain of decay was brewing in the clouds, forming a membrane that covered the entire earth. It was brewing ominous. Along with the oncoming hurricane, the visibility began to decrease rapidly. The coldness began to erode Huaisher's skin, slowly spreading inwards and petrifying it. However, under the dim light, it could only turn into speckle-like stone flakes that kept peeling off. Bolts of lightning constantly danced in the clouds, violently stirring up everything in front of them. When they landed on the chimera's body, they left scorch marks. In the darkness, there were countless flames moving about. Huaisher could see the shadows moving in and out of the thick clouds on both sides, as well as the roar of the engines. Countless ornithopters and aircrafts were hovering in the clouds. Like fighting birds, they were pecking at each other's wings. When they collided with each other, explosions and fleeting flames would erupt. There were even aircrafts emitting thick smoke that brushed past Huaisher's head. In the flames, Huaisher could see the pilot ejecting from it. Immediately after, even more gigantic beasts pounced onto the battlefield from above. Like a giant whale swimming in the ocean, they opened their mouths and pounced on a large number of fish. In the seemingly quiet clouds, the undercurrent was turbulent and the killing was happening one after another. Countless flashes of light constantly lit up, extinguished, and burst out again. At this moment, the intruder suddenly encountered the concentrated fire of both sides. The live explosive bomb spread its wings and whistled. Huge wounds and bloody holes were left on the dying chimera's body. The giant beast was wailing and struggling hard, but couldn't get rid of the sharp blades wedged into its bones. As the chains tightened, it felt pain and madness. It swung its body wildly and pounced down until it broke through the clouds in front of it and fell into the world shrouded in torrential rain. A crack appeared above the clouds, and the fleeting dim light illuminated the incomplete outline of the giant beast. It also illuminated the terrifying world full of devastation. Huaisher almost suffocated. That was already a real hell. The gray fog shrouded the earth, and countless spores bloomed into beautiful flowers on the ground. In the blood rain, a terrifying, blazing hurricane formed dozens of tornadoes that wandered on the ground without any pattern, cruelly uprooting everything on the ground. The lava-like flames gathered in the belly of the tornadoes, illuminating the gray world. Sharp ice crystals grew out of the soil and steel, turning into clusters of beautiful crystals. But the crystals were quickly covered by ash-like snow powder. When he looked down, he could see countless ferocious colors squirming on the ground, strangling each other in the same place. They expanded or contracted, devouring each other as if they were in a life and death struggle. Then, they overlapped to form other abnormal colors. The entire Twilight Village had become a cauldron of chaos. In a trance, Huaishir felt as if he had seen some kind of terrifying alchemy, but he didn't know whether it was a disaster or a miracle brewing from this hell. Or both. But he didn't have time to think about those details. Because at the end of the earth, the illusory giant with the solemn crown on its head was already emitting a brilliant light, rumbling forward. Shouldering the heavy iron crystal throne, the domed giant strolled through hell, heading straight for the Great Pyramid. It was as if gods were fighting with each other. The earth shook and the sky trembled. Huaishir's vision went black. He felt the rapid weakening and mutation of his body, and even the discomfort and panic in his soul. The blood rain, the febrile wind, and the sedimentation tide, followed by the highly toxic air, and even forced into a weakened state, Huaishir suddenly felt as if he was suffering from altitude sickness. He couldn't breathe. His physical strength was rapidly declining, and he was actually not much stronger than a normal person. Immediately afterwards, the origin substance began to rapidly evaporate and rise into the air. The mist-like curse of terror began to invade his consciousness, and then it was once again converted back into origin substance by the sealing hand, creating an unbearable cycle. It was as if he was in the middle of a contradiction. The highly toxic air constantly brought him an endless stream of vitality, but the weakening curse caused him to constantly lose strength. After applying a debuff that reduced his physical strength by half, the vitality in the blood rain quickly grew. The sedimentation tide constantly absorbed his origin form and reason, but the curse of fear and bloodthirst constantly replenished his energy and strength. Blood continued to flow out of the small wounds, but the vigorous life force was rapidly creating more blood. It was as if his entire body had turned into a swimming pool with both the inlet and outlet valves opened at the same time. He felt a strange discomfort amidst the intense metabolism and the rapid flow of origin form. While he was bleeding, he was also urgently receiving blood. As the death line approached, he was constantly delaying the death line. It felt so contradictory, so strange. But after getting used to it, it seemed pretty good. Huaishir raised his hand and looked at his skin that was constantly peeling off and growing back. As he fell, he felt an indescribable sense of novelty. Immediately afterwards, he noticed that the ground in front of him was rapidly expanding. There was also a huge burning tower. Countless rusted steel grew on it like thorns, coiling layer by layer. At the top of the tower, the scorching sun that looked like a single eye was still blooming with a dim yellow light. It was so familiar. That was the heart of the Twilight Village. This was the center of the entire hell. A roar burst out from the ground below. Immediately afterwards, intense light shot out from the air defense array and tore apart the giant chimera's shell. A burnt smell spread out along with the evaporating cooling liquid. At this moment, accompanied by a loud sound, a huge shadow fell from the sky. On the ground, the people behind the protective suits looked up in shock and saw countless tentacles fluttering in the wind, as well as the giant chimera covered in cracks and wounds. Splashing sticky blood, it wriggled in the hurricane while hissing. As the spear of compassion pierced through it, it exerted all its strength amidst the intense pain and activated the overloaded gravity generator in its body for the last time. The terrifying momentum that was like a falling mountain suddenly stopped. But immediately afterwards, explosive flames spewed out from the depths of the tentacles and mouth parts. In the blood-red rain, dark green venom spread in all directions. As the ground shook violently, the huge silhouette fell into the flames, never to move again. And on top of the broken skeleton, a figure slowly crawled out from the crack in the skull. "Are you scared?" He looked around at the silent battlefield and could not help but put his hands on his hips. He looked up to the sky and laughed proudly, landing safely, as expected of me. "What's that thing?" Ogius put down the binoculars and looked at his companions beside him in shock. It seems, maybe it's Secretary Huai? The exploration team member replied in shock. Didn't the people above say that he escaped from prison? They also said that he would be here soon. Look, he's here. Why are you calling this thing here? Ogiest felt that something was wrong. Although it a little too cool to fall from the sky with such a big thing, didn't he land safely? The exploration team member hid behind the bunker and could not hide his envy. That's great, that's great. If I have the chance, I want to play with it too. Who the hell cares about what he's carrying when he falls down? Ogiest pulled his hair and was about to go crazy. He pointed at the biochemical behemoth and the bunker of the Eye of Nightmare in the distance, as well as Huaishur, who was standing in the middle with a smug look on his face. But why did he fall into the opposite camp? Ogiest was about to go crazy. It can't be because he betrayed us, right? That's not impossible. The exploration team member lowered his voice and said, I have a junior who went to the Ivy League. I heard him say that Secretary Huai went to the Ivy League for less than 2 weeks and even had a child. Look at how happy he is. And now, Huaishur finally realized what was wrong. There was no envy and admiration in their eyes as he had expected. There was no cheers from his colleagues or warmth from the Iron Crystal constellation. And why did the uniforms of the people around him look so much like the Ivy League? Amidst the silence, those gazes gradually became dangerous. Chapter 581. There was a short period of silence on the battlefield. The Eye of Nightmare and the ascendants of the Ivy League looked at each other. Finally, they looked at Huaishur, who was standing on the head of their domesticated beast with his hands on his hips. He looked very powerful. 100,000 question marks appeared on their heads. What the F***CK was a surprise. Half an hour ago, the news of Huaishur breaking out of prison had already reached everyone's ears. A lone hero, brave into the tiger's den, defeated and captured, endured humiliation, waited for the right time, seized the opportunity, risked his life to break out of prison, fought against the Tier 4, successfully escaped, killed the ferocious beasts, and the Hell Umbrella descended. He skillfully jumped left and right between eating in the village and going home to eat. After courting death one after another, he relied on his own set of tricks to successfully blind the dog eyes of both sides. It was as smooth as flowing water. It was so smooth that it left everyone dumbfounded. After that, he suddenly jumped out of the hinterland of their own side, as if he had jumped out a crack in a rock. He had a smug look on his face. At this time, anyone would feel that something was wrong, right? Everyone retreated in an instant. They were on high alert and on high alert. All the hair on their bodies stood on end, and they immediately came to a conclusion. This was a conspiracy. Coincidentally, Huaishur also came to a conclusion at the same time. It was the same 4 words, but it was not the same as theirs. It's over. In this sudden silence, he instinctively wanted to use French etiquette to improve the relationship between the two sides. However, when he noticed the vigilance and wariness in the other party's eyes, he suddenly felt a glimmer of hope. He stood with his hands behind his back, hiding his crazily trembling hands behind his back. He stood on the skeleton of the chimera with his chest puffed out. He looked down from above. Out of habit, he squeezed out a mysterious smile that was filled with an evil charm. He looked at the few acquaintances behind the bunker and asked loudly, "Long time no see, Colonel. How have you been?" The colonel stared at Huaishur indifferently. He raised his hand, and the army behind him raised their guns and aimed at Huaishur's face. Countless wandering red dots landed on his body. However, Huaishur remained unmoved. His heart was about to stop beating out of fear. However, his expression became more and more solemn and sacred. At the moment when death was about to arrive, his mind spun like lightning. Countless inspirations flashed through his mind, and in the end, they turned into a miracle of reversing death and gushed out. "Comrade Colonel, the undercover mission is over. There's no need to fight anymore," he announced in a loud voice. "The great Grandmaster asked me to inform you that you can return to the team." There was a moment of confusion. Intimidated by the aura of the traitor, the colonel opened his mouth in shock. He was stunned for a moment and didn't know what he was talking about. What was lurking? What did it mean to return to the team? What the F***ck are you talking about? However, after the sudden astonishment, the others couldn't help but turn around to look in disbelief. He was dumbfounded. I didn't. The colonel opened his mouth in shock, trying to defend himself. But then, he saw Huai Shi's body suddenly collapse on the corpse of the chimera. Rolling darkness spewed out, and the darkness of the burial sanctum enveloped everything around it. Countless afterimages emerged from it. They turned around in unison. They sprinted, seizing this moment of life and death. Huai Shi ran toward his home base, covering his head and screaming, "Great Grandmaster, save me! Fire! Fire!" The colonel's vision darkened. He was so angry that he almost had a cerebral hemorrhage. He roared in anger, "Kill that scum from the ivory tower!" There was no need for any orders. The 16 giant chimeras, the hundreds of mercenaries from the Eye of Nightmares, and even the infernal legion present all had the colonel's orders appear in their eyeglasses. Soon, Ivy's warship distributed the detailed siege plan to every step to everyone's hands. In the heart of the Ivy League, Huai Shi once again began his desperate escape. In an instant, more than half of the countless afterimages that were split into were gone under the sweeping fire and attack. The colonel's army launched a massacre with unimaginable efficiency. The alchemy weapons that were enough to arm an entire army were all modern and superior to existing technology. Now, they were displaying terrifying efficiency in hell. Huai Shi did not dare to show his head at all. He kept shuttling back and forth in a sorry state, struggling at death's door. Seeing that their reaction was so fast, Huai Shi's heart turned cold. If he had known earlier, he would have shouted, "Go and tell Liz that Michelle is a traitor." In fact, it would have been even more heartless. He could have played the same old tune and talked about his non-existent romantic affairs in prison to distract them. But that would have been too heartless. Even if he did not have a conscience, he should at least have a bottom line. If it was not for the fact that he was about to die and had no other choice, he would not have chosen to do that. It was too painful to have a bad reputation. Social death and biological death were both death, but the former was more painful. His reputation was already terrible, so he should quickly accumulate some good karma. The more he accumulated, the better. He felt that if this wave of attacks did not go well, he would be able to use it soon. The fourth time, Shadow Burial shuttled. Huai Shi's figure suddenly appeared from the darkness of the bunker. With a flying kick, he stepped on the back of the Eye of Nightmare's head and fled in a sorry state under the relentless gunfire of the machine gun. Get out of the way, let me do it." The furious colonel had lost his patience. He pushed away the sniper in front of him, then raised his hand and took out a heavy steel object from a box on the ground. He carried it on his shoulder. The heavy cannon swayed and aimed at Huai Shi in the distance, while the cross on the display screen locked onto his back that was repeatedly jumping horizontally. "Die!" In the sharp sound of the lock being completed, the colonel pulled the trigger. Instantly, blazing flames spewed out from it. With terrifying firepower that was enough to burn an entire tank to ashes, the shoulder-mounted rocket launcher roared and flew toward Huai Shi with a dazzling light. A premonition of death instantly rose from the back of Huai Shi's head. In fact, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. There was a cold chill everywhere, and it made no difference at all. However, there was always a sequence and priority of death. Some deaths were more peaceful, while some deaths were very tragic. Didn't I just King escape from prison? Why did you use a rocket launcher to mess with me? Huai Shi shouted in grief and indignation. He exhausted all his source substance and used the fifth shadow burial shuttling. Suddenly, his figure appeared 100 meters away and dodged the rocket's bombardment. However, his vision immediately turned black. As the shockwave spread, countless gravel and soil flew over like sharp arrows. He was swept up by the heat wave and febrile wind behind him and involuntarily flew into the sky. He fell toward the area where the intense fire between the two sides was exchanged. As the sky and earth spun, he finally saw the exploration team's bunker and formation on the iron crystal seat. He could not help but cry. He was so close to being able to return to the spring at this moment. In mid-air, the soaring Great Pyramid, the alien realm of the underworld Tlalocan, suddenly lit up with a burst of light. Then, the countless torrential rain that was rolling back into the sky suddenly shook. A dazzling bolt of lightning as thick as a bucket emerged from the brewing dark clouds, illuminating Huaishi's dull expression. At this moment, the killing intent from the high priest descended from the sky. Wherever it passed, everything in front of the lightning was cleanly burned into charcoal and fell apart. Stupid little brother, are you stupid? However, the moment the lightning was only a line away from Huaishi's face, it stopped abruptly. This was because in the sky, there was a huge palm pinching the end of the lightning, as if it was catching the tail of a snake, causing the fatal venom and teeth to be unable to cross this last line. It was completely illogical and completely unbelievable. It was like stepping on the ashes of physics and doing a tap dance. However, alchemy was such an unreasonable thing. In the hands of the dome giant Atlas, as his 5 fingers closed, the lightning was easily crushed like glass. Huaishir finally succeeded in flying out from behind the ivy bunker and landed on the scorched ground of the battlefield. In an instant, he disappeared. He felt as if the ground had turned into some kind of liquid and swallowed him. Huaishir's vision turned black, and then the world spun. He was wrapped in an undercurrent and could not help but shudder rapidly underground. Finally, under the great force, he rose up. He was squeezed out of the ground, soared into the air, and landed on the hard stone floor, panting violently. Before he could react, he was already in the fortress of the Iron Crystal Constellation. Until he saw Andrea's familiar face, Huaishir finally breathed a sigh of relief. He was moved to tears. I almost died. He held Andrea's hand tightly and shook it. At the crucial moment, Andrea, you are still the most reliable. Andrea was awkwardly pulled by Huaishir. After a long time, she helplessly explained, I'm a Tier 4 sublimator. According to the contract, I can't directly participate in the battle. Huaishir was stunned and looked over. Who is that? Andrea coughed twice and pointed at Martin, who was standing behind Huaishir with an unhappy look on his face. Huaishir was stunned. This was really unexpected. He did not expect Martin to still be there. Because his presence was too weak, he did not think of this at all. But the situation just now was undoubtedly the result of Martin's specialization in liquefaction. Although there was some unhappiness between the two, Martin was actually able to help him at the most critical moment. This immediately changed his view of Martin. Thank you. He enthusiastically pulled the young man's hand and shook it twice. Martin pulled twice and found that he could not break free. He could only snort and turn his head. Don't cause trouble. Where did this arrogant character come from? A group of medical staff rushed up to give Huaishir emergency treatment. Fortunately, other than a few bullet holes on his back, there were no major problems. After a little patching, he could continue to work as a human. Just as they were giving him a blood transfusion, Andrea came up with a serious face and hesitated. What's wrong? Huaishir asked. After a moment of silence, the big sister looked left and right. She pulled up her hair and lowered her beautiful face. She leaned over and slowly came over. Huaishir was stunned, his eyes wide open. Just as he was hesitating whether to resist or not, he heard her whisper in his ear. So, is it true about the child? In the awkward silence, Huaishir's expression gradually stiffened. He looked at the serious and curious Andrea in disbelief. Something is wrong with you too. Chapter 582. It was as if a moment of silence had suddenly arrived. The surrounding noises had all disappeared. Everything was in order without any pause. The infusion, disinfection, and bandaging were all done in the medical room as usual. However, even the sound of breathing had disappeared at this moment. It seemed that everyone had their heads lowered and were focused on their work. However, they couldn't help but secretly perk up their ears, hiding the burning fire of gossip in their eyes. Especially a sublimator who was pretending to be asleep, whose ears were almost turned to the back of his head. It couldn't be helped. Some things, from the age of 80 to the age of 8, Everyone liked to listen to a few ears no matter how serious they were. How refreshing it was for the person involved to personally narrate his journey. If they didn't eavesdrop, how could they console themselves for their hard work in hell? So about the child, Andrea concealed the curiosity and desire to pry in her heart. She lowered her voice, and her big eyes were filled with anticipation. Is it true? Fleischer looked at her in a daze. His vision turned black. He finally felt the social death that was close at hand. What's going on? Wait, how did all of you find out about it so quickly? Didn't you come to hell to develop and explore the present realm? Where's your determination to sacrifice and pay for the present realm? Even in hell, you won't forget to keep an eye on your colleagues' scandals. Also, Fleischer's eyes turned, and he finally reacted. His expression became serious. Who said this? Grandmaster. After Andrea finished speaking, she immediately covered her mouth in shock and disbelief. Really? No. Fleischer rolled his eyes and raged. Why would you believe him? I'm a virgin. Therefore, 10 minutes later, the entire Iron Crystal constellation knew that Fleischer was a virgin at this time. Fleischer didn't even have the strength to defend himself. Anyway, even if he defended himself, it would be useless. He was already prepared to welcome the arrival of social death. After cleaning, suturing, bandaging, and blood transfusion like an assembly line, Fleischer was stuffed into a wheelchair and sent directly to the temporary meeting room in the hangar within 4 drip. It was time for the final mission. Listening to the voices above, he yawned and couldn't hide his sleepiness. He began to be distracted. Next, we will enter the final stage of the contest for the Twilight Village. In the corner of the hangar, in a temporary conference room made of several boxes, the purser announced, "This is the most important stage. No slacking or negligence is allowed." There was a solemn response. Fleischer opened his mouth and wanted to follow, but he found that by the time he reacted, everyone had already finished shouting, and only his voice was left behind. It was extremely awkward. The purser looked at him and said, "According to the divination and the calculation of chaos in the control room, we will be able to completely crack the outer defense and activate the central tower in 20 minutes. It could be foreseen that there would be a lot of unknown changes in the Twilight Village. When the time comes, the Grandmaster will need to use all his strength to compete with Ivy for the right to control hell. He won't have time to care about anything else. Ms. Andrea will be in charge of the defensive line, but she will not take action unless absolutely necessary. I will be in charge of the mission and command. Therefore, the victory or defeat of the front line will be in your hands." Everyone raised their voices in response. This time, Fleischer finally kept up with the rhythm and did not fall behind. The purser looked around and announced, "Then, according to the previous arrangement, after 10 minutes, everyone will start to move. The members of the exploration team will still be led by Ogiest. You need to prioritize the safety and action of the scholars and alchemists. You should have already been used to it, so I don't need to say more. Your purpose is to ensure that the eternal core furnace can be activated smoothly. Apart from that, the priority of everything has to be lowered." In the drowsiness, the purser's voice seemed to be getting farther and farther away. Fleischer lowered her head and fell asleep in exhaustion. In this short sleep, he seemed to have a sudden flash in front of his eyes, and he appeared in the middle of a forest full of birds and flowers. It was a scene full of vitality. What the hell? Fleischer looked around blankly. Above the countless lush trees, artificial stars under the night sky, and the eternal sun hanging between heaven and earth, there was a pleasant laughter in the distance, and there were people talking softly. But when he looked up, he saw a huge shadow at the end of his sight, like a huge tower holding up the whole world. It was like a carefully carved tombstone. Just looking at it made him feel an inexplicable fear and uneasiness and indescribable pain. An invisible hand was ravaging his lungs and clenching his heart. He fell to the ground and tried to get up, but his limbs were quickly breaking like fragile pottery, falling apart as the cracks spread. Darkness gushed out from the cracks like a spring. When he tried to raise his head, he saw the strange shadow in front of him. Wearing a crown and wearing a solemn robe, the withered skeleton was looking down at him. Its lips opened as if it was saying something, but Huaisher could not hear it clearly. In the drowsiness and pain, only a thunderous voice could be heard. Huaisher. In his ears, an unhappy voice suddenly sounded. Huaisher, can you hear me? I'm here. Huaisher opened his eyes, sweating profusely. He finally woke up from the nightmare. There were no ghosts or demons in front of him, only a huge figure, glowing with the light of steel, looking at him with a frown. It was the Grandmaster. In the palm of his hand that reached for Huaisher, the light of the alchemy secret instrument slowly dissipated. The meeting had ended at some point, and there was no one else around. In the distance, the purser saw that Huaisher had woken up and turned to leave. How long was I asleep? 10 minutes, the Grandmaster replied coldly. After the meeting, Simon realized that you wouldn't wake up no matter how hard he tried, so he dragged me here. At that time, I was preparing to decipher the important steps before the refinement, and the whole process was delayed by 10 minutes. Thanks to you, I really hope that you can win back those 10 minutes. I will. Huaisher forced a smile and wiped the sweat off his face. Did you have a dream? The Grandmaster asked. Yes. Huaisher nodded, recalling the scene in the dream, and frowned. Sunmaker, he seemed to have something to say to me. He's not the only one who has something to say to you. There's also this one in front of you. The Grandmaster lowered his head, scrutinizing his face, and asked word by word, Now, Huaisher, answer me. Are you still awake? Yes. Huaisher nodded. Then, are you up to your task? I can. Huaisher answered. The Grandmaster didn't say anything else, silently staring at him, as if trying to smell any trace of uneasiness and fear. In the end, he nodded slightly. I hope so. He picked through the medicine box next to him and quickly mixed the medicine. Finally, he picked up the syringe, pressed it against Huaisher's neck, and pulled the trigger. The cold medicine was instantly injected into the carotid artery. After a moment of discomfort, Huaisher's drowsiness began to quickly fade, and he regained consciousness. It seemed that his breathing had become much smoother. What is this? A stabilizer for spirituality that can temporarily keep your consciousness clear. In fact, you should be given the regret medicine, but very few people can withstand the impact of the mind mechanization. The Grandmaster pulled out the syringe and threw it into the trash can. After all the sub-control centers are activated, the Twilight Village will enter the active stage. The records left in Hell will be more active than usual, and it will also have a deeper impact on you. Originally, it was more subtle, but you have been locked up in the Ivy League for a while. It will be difficult for you to adapt when you suddenly return to the ground. I'm allergic? Huaisher couldn't believe it. This is also an inherent flaw of celestial genealogy. Excellent individuals will obtain the adaptability of the abyss, but at the same time, it will be more difficult to resist the impact of Hell's records. The possibility of being assimilated and solidified by Hell will also greatly increase. The Grandmaster reminded him, You have to be careful. Don't become like Chandra. Huaisher's movements stiffened, and he once again recalled the figure that was assimilated by this Hell. Huaisher hadn't seen him for a long time, but this didn't mean that Chandra had disappeared. As long as the Twilight Village existed, he couldn't be free. Do we really have no way to save him? Huaisher hesitated for a long time and finally asked, Maybe there is. The Grandmaster asked in return, But do you think that after being assimilated, it will still be the original Chandra that we can save? Huaisher was speechless. In a short silence, a sharp bell rang in the distance, mixed with a faint roar. Alarms sounded one after another. Huaisher looked up in surprise. What is that? The forecast for the opening of the stage. The Grandmaster looked away. The break time is over, Huaisher. The final curtain is about to be unveiled. Everyone should return to their positions, including me and you. It sounds like I have a lot of weight. Yes, who said that the tool is not important? The Grandmaster patted him on the shoulder. Before leaving, he looked at him one last time. Everyone has their own things to do. I'll leave the rest to you. A minute later, Huaisher had changed his equipment and walked into the hangar again. The roar from outside was getting louder and louder. The world didn't slow down because of Huaishi's breath. The battle between the nano-sequence mechanical body from the ivory tower and the ivy behemoth was still going on, and even more tragic. Countless ornithopters flew into the sky along the tracks and started a new battle in the clouds. Through the blood rain and fog outside the door, one could see the flames rising one after another. In this real hell, both sides were trying their best to make this hell even more hellish. Was it because it was already hell, so no matter what they did, it wouldn't be any worse? Or was it because after coming to hell, they had no scruples about releasing their nature? It was hard to understand. In front of the departure gate, a truck with completely changed armor and equipment had been waiting for a long time. The door opened, waiting for his arrival. "Sorry to keep you waiting." Huaishir walked into the carriage and greeted her colleagues who were sitting on both sides of the carriage. Ogiest, who was sharpening the blade of an axe, looked up at him and raised his eyebrows. "You look good after sleeping. I hope it's not just looking good." Huaishir shrugged and sat in the last empty seat in the car. Next to him was the girl in gray, who was a little uneasy. She was wearing a gray robe outside her armor. She held her helmet stiffly and didn't dare to look up at her teacher. "Are you nervous?" Huaishir asked. "I heard from the purser that you signed up. To be honest, I was a little scared." Yuan lowered her head, afraid that Huaishir would be angry because of her unauthorized decision. "Where's little 19? Huaishir looked up at other places in the car. "Should be here too?" Yes. The person diagonally opposite hurriedly took off his helmet and showed a stiff and cordial smile. "What can I do for you?" Looking at the insincere smile, Huaishir couldn't help but sigh. "I guess you must think that if Yuan signed up and didn't sign up, you'll be remembered by the teacher, right?" "Teacher, what are you talking about? How could I think of you as that kind of person?" Lin 19 said in a trembling voice. "I volunteered." "Really? Then remember to rush to the front, and I'll be the supervisor." There was a burst of laughter around. Lin 19 shrank his neck and didn't dare to speak. "All right, let's all relax." Huaishir shook his head. "You've already got on the car. How can I drive you out? Besides, the purser told me that you too did a good job when I was not here. I don't think you will die in vain." Ogiest raised his hand. "I can testify to that. Although the kid is a little slippery, he runs away very quickly. As for the little girl, she hasn't had a chance to make a move yet. I'm looking forward to it. If you ask me, it's best for them to stay in the iron crystal base obediently. But how can anyone who becomes an ascendant escape from this?" Huaishir sighed. "As a student, it's a rare honor for you to be willing to go to the battlefield with me under such circumstances. So, I won't reprimand you, but I hope you can understand the danger." He said, "You have to protect yourselves. Don't be like me and rush to the front." In the silence, the two students nodded solemnly. After thinking for a moment, Huaishir scratched his head awkwardly and lowered his voice. "Also, if you feel that you can't win, just surrender. As long as you don't let anyone find out that you are my student, there shouldn't be any big problems. At most, you'll be locked up for a few days. The food in the Ivy prison is pretty good. The bread and soup are very nourishing. Maybe you can even gain a few pounds." As he spoke, he couldn't help but smile with exultation. The people in there are nice to hear. Every one of them is a talent. It's actually quite interesting. Silence suddenly fell. Everyone was stunned to see Huaishir instructing his students to surrender to the enemy. Suddenly, they wanted to represent the ivory tower to kill this traitor. What King traitor? Is there something wrong with your classroom? How can you teach your students how to surrender to the enemy in front of your teammates? But even if he knew that it was wrong, Huaishir still couldn't help but hope that his students could move faster when they surrendered. He wished he could sew a little white flag for them. Of course, he would love his own children. It wasn't easy to have two students. If one of them died, he didn't know how sad it would be. But no matter how worried and uneasy he was, he couldn't drive them out of the car. After all, after becoming a sublimator, unless they stayed in their own place forever, who wouldn't have such a day? Huaishir wasn't worried about Yuan's ability to protect herself. But Lin Shizhou didn't have any ability to fight head-on. Huaishir could only give him the sacrificial knife and instruct him to be a long-range support obediently. But he didn't need Huaishir to instruct him to do that. If it was time to run, he would definitely run faster than him. Just like that, after a short wait, the car door slowly closed. In the blood rain outside the door, a storm suddenly swept through. Countless flames rose slowly and occupied the sky, as if the whole world was completely ignited. The world was immersed in blood and flames. The truck that had been waiting for a long time suddenly shook and rushed toward hell in front of them. At that moment, everyone stopped talking. They clenched their weapons in solemnity. From this moment on, the war to determine the ownership of hell began. Chapter 583. In the darkness, Michelle opened her eyes on the altar. "Has it begun?" he asked. "Yes." The old man below the altar nodded and quietly waited for the order from the host. A damp wind blew from afar. "It's raining," Michelle muttered in realization. "Yes, I've only slept for a while, and it's already like this." Michelle lifted her turbid eyes from the restraints of the altar. Countless sharp thorns and roots pierced out of his body, coiling around the throne that represented the seat of God. In the end, the roots sank into the ground in stone slabs one by one, connecting him and this huge divine mark as one. Then, a heavy pulse and heartbeat came from the depths of the darkness, like a tide. With every pulse, Michelle's eyes were filled with painful blood vessels. They overlapped and covered her old eyes in a scarlet red. "I originally thought that I would be able to last longer. Looks like I'm really getting old," Michelle murmured softly. She lowered her head weakly, as if she did not even have the strength to support her neck. "So tired," he said. "As for what happens afterwards, no, I should say victory or defeat, I'll leave it to you, Pandalong." Beneath the altar, Elder Pandalong's shoulders jolted, and he couldn't help but step forward with widened eyes. "Please don't give up so easily." "I didn't give up," Michelle interrupted him and told him calmly. "Pandalong, I haven't given up yet." Pandalong was stunned. "Now that things have come to this, I feel very ashamed." On the altar, the alchemist said, "I am no match for Mikhail. Even if I can tie with him now, it's not because of my talent and hard work, but because I've already used all the dirty methods. No matter the cost, no matter the means." However, this was already his limit. Even if he used the last of his strength, he was still unable to cross that bottomless abyss. He had tried and prayed countless times, but that was all he could do. Michelle said calmly, "From the past until now, I have never won against him, not even once." Thus, he admitted the bloody truth with great humiliation, whether it was the results, the status, the identity, or the woman he loved. Looking back on his life of unwillingness, grief, and indignation, those vivid memories were actually all engraved with pale defeats. He chased with all his might and used all his means to challenge it, but in the end, he could only fall into the abyss with bitterness and pain. The pain of the shadow can never be seen by those who are illuminated by the sun. He'd originally thought that after so many years, he'd already been able to forget those lowly pasts, toss them aside, and play down everything. But now, when he thought about it, he felt such heart-wrenching pain and such unwillingness. He had never hated failure as much as he did now. No matter how small the failure was, he could not accept it. He had never desired victory as much as he did now, even if it was the most humble and insignificant victory. "I'm already old, Pandalong. I can't take another step forward. However, you still have a future and possibilities." Michelle lowered his head, begging like a beggar. He said, "Please, help me win against him. Before I die of old age, let me try one more time. I've lost countless times in my life, but only this time. I want to win." In the silence, Pandalong wanted to look away. He couldn't bear to see his close friend in such a sorry state, but some kind of force didn't allow him to look away. It didn't allow him to look down on that thin and tired man. It didn't allow him to avoid such a request. "You'll win, Michelle." Pandalong raised his head and told him with determination, as if he was declaring the truth. "I promise we'll win." Hence, the alchemist on the altar chuckled softly. "Thank you, Pandalong." He calmly closed his eyes. He no longer had any worries. Here, he offered this old body as a sacrifice, imitating the inverted god who had once sacrificed himself. His consciousness once again sank into the storm of origin, substances, and miracles. Controlling the miracles, he transformed into the reflections of the holy spirits on the ground. At that moment, the alien realm of the underworld, Tlatalorcan, rumbled. Endless lightning burst forth and slashed at the domed giant in front of him. Michael from America and Michael from the Russian Federation, two names of the same origin, two brothers of the same sect, two completely different fates. With 42 years of humiliation and unwillingness, he once again stood on the arena and challenged the unattainable great grandmaster. The reflection of the Holy Spirits opened his eyes above the clouds. Come on, Mikhail. Let's once again determine the winner. The sky and earth shook, thunder and lightning struck. The earth trembled continuously, and the rain of blood was swept up into the sky by the hurricane. Behind the broken dark clouds, huge shadows collided with each other, bursting out a disaster-like tornado. Fleischer leaned against the window in shock and stared at the intense flash of light coming from above. What the hell was going on? The battle had started? Had the dome giant and the alien realm of the underworld entered a decisive battle now? The newbie on the ground trembled. Once again, he became an ant under the giant's feet, dodging the aftermath of the sky in a sorry state. However, he couldn't go back home to wash up and sleep. Instead, he stubbornly drilled into the deepest part of hell. Fleischer felt that there must be something wrong with these people's brains, including himself. The hell he saw along the way was no longer as dead as it used to be. Instead, it seemed to have been resurrected in the war, revealing traces of a ferocious aura. Under the countless ruins, blood rain and febrile wind covered the place. Even through the carriage and wearing a breathing device, he could feel the terrifying toxicity and harm in the hurricane. The closer he got to the central tower, the more he could feel the trauma that was once engraved on this land. There were even traces left behind from the war between the workshop masters and the Sea of Titans. Countless huge humanoid war machines and all kinds of strange corpses. They fell messily among the ruins and turned into stone statues under the curse, but they still retained the pain and despair before they died. Now they were all broken. But when everyone began to feel numb to this, Fleischer's heart was faintly filled with doubts and puzzlement. He couldn't tell what the problem was, until the wreckage was thrown out of sight as the truck rumbled forward. Fleischer's heart trembled, and he suddenly came to a realization. Those corpses and wreckage all fell with their backs to the tower. It was as if they were fleeing. In his astonishment, his vision blurred, and he couldn't help but clench his fists. Amidst the countless broken walls and petrified corpses, he once again saw that strange figure through the turbulent rain of blood, Chandra. Behind a broken mask, countless machines and gears emerged. He stared at Fleischer, his lips moving as if he was saying something. Soon, he disappeared without a trace. It was not until this time that Fleischer noticed Ogiest not far away. He was looking in the direction where Chandra disappeared, unable to take his eyes off it until it was blocked and covered by layers of ruins and wreckage as the truck moved forward. He clenched the scabbard of the short knife in his hand tightly. After a long time, he let go. He could see it too. On the iron crystal seat, Fleischer had heard about their relationship, just like a father and son. Chandra was the one who raised Ogiest single-handedly. When Chandra was assimilated by hell, Ogiest was by his side. He even once told Fleischer that if it wasn't for Chandra, he would be the one who was assimilated. He could understand the pain and helplessness in his heart at this moment. Fleischer lowered his eyes and didn't speak. The truck was still moving forward, speeding through the heavy rain and strong winds. The originally short journey turned out to be so long. In this turbulent hell, everything was changing rapidly. The earth rose and collapsed. The sky cracked and healed. Everything was swallowed up by the raging tide. Everything seemed to have been pushed to the edge of a cliff and was in danger. But no one thought that the war would come so quickly. Just under the tower, when the ground layer violently changed and the truck made a sharp turn, it collided with a huge chimera. In the loud noise and shock, if it weren't for the restraint of the seatbelt, everyone would have flown out of their chairs. It was as if they accidentally broke into a large group of ivy. Artillery fire rushed toward them. Seeing the huge chimera pouncing toward them, everyone's face suddenly changed. No, they did break into Ivy's attack route, and there were several chimeras guarding this place. Damn it, meeting at the corner. Huaishir was stunned and sighed. Is this the beginning of some kind of youth campus love? Unfortunately, you're already 18 years old and no longer youthful. There's no such thing as a campus in hell. But at least you can fight for love. Ogius grabbed the safety rope and looked at Huaishir meaningfully. He was still in the mood to joke. If you can rely on your looks to attract the opponent's main combat power, it will be a great achievement. Forget about this kind of achievement. Sensing the dangerous gaze of the girl next to him, Huaishir's hair stood on end. Don't talk nonsense, or I will sue you for slander. The legal department is really scary. Laughter and shock spread out again, and everyone's vision turned black. Hell's car god was on the road again. The truck suddenly turned and narrowly avoided the chimera's attack. Then, it spat out a tail flame, turned around under the feet of the giant-like chimera, and sped straight toward the tower. Behind the truck, countless drones had dissolved into nanosequences and were reorganizing, forming an ivory tower of war weapon and pouncing toward Ivy's chimera. The giant monster and steel wrestled together. Accompanied by an explosion, flames rose from the rainstorm again, before everyone could breathe a sigh of relief. Then, live bombs fell from the sky, and countless shrill screams burst forth. The man-made biological weapons spread their wings and suddenly rose into the sky, pouncing toward the ground. Blazing flames rose from the ground. Airwaves rolled. An ear-piercing alarm suddenly appeared in the car, along with a deadly crisis. After crashing through the wall in front of them, they saw the eye of nightmare spreading out in the rainstorm, and even a few chimeras soaring in the blood rain like squids. Specialized living explosive bomb. Dozens of tentacles danced, and they suddenly pounced toward the truck. The lock was complete. With such a tight formation and defense, it could no longer be described as a coincidence. Ivy League knew their location. No, the preparation was so thorough that even the entire plan had been made clear to him. Otherwise, how could they have so delicately penetrated the rear of their position and sniped them? In the next moment, the squids soaring in the rainstorm suddenly accelerated, and one of them had already pounced in front of the truck. Without giving them any chance to dodge, it quickly expanded and exploded. Flames burst out. Chapter 584. At this moment, the storm of red flames spread in all directions. After specialization, each cuttlefish-type chimera had the terrifying power to completely destroy the outer wall of an entire fortress. At this moment, they were dozens of meters away. As the flames burst out, thick airwaves rolled. The entire truck suddenly rose into the air, like a withered leaf swept up by a strong wind. It was overturned. Countless armors instantly cracked, and even a large part of the windows were shattered. Amidst the intense rotation, Raymond gritted his teeth and stepped on the accelerator. He still tried to adjust his trajectory and direction, wanting to soar into the air. But then, a few cuttlefish quickly exploded, sealing off the truck's escape route from all directions. During this short pause, the largest cuttlefish had already wriggled its tentacles and rolled them towards the truck. At this critical moment, Raymond gritted his teeth, slapped the button beside him, and roared at the top of his voice, "Prepare to receive the enemy." The entire truck suddenly shook, and as flames burst out, the carriage behind it was thrown out. The front of the truck also rolled in the wind and smashed into the ruins beside it. He narrowly avoided this wave of face-to-face explosions. Along with the explosion, the carriage flying in the air reversed violently, breaking through a thick curtain of rain, and was already directly above the eye of Nightmare. At that moment, the cracked and distorted carriage suddenly shattered. A figure shot out from it like lightning. He faced the ground. "Take my hammer!" The heavy hammer was raised, and flames burst out, tearing through the rain of blood. The wolf's head was full of ferocity as it smashed towards the enemies below. Iron and iron collided at that moment. Immediately after, the strong ones completely defeated the weak ones. The thick and heavy shield shattered under the impact of the hammer falling from the sky. Then, the figure behind the shield flew backward. The first to bear the brunt of the attack opened up a gap. Huaishur threw out an alchemy bomb, forcing the people around him to retreat, barely clearing a small safe space. But then he was forced to retreat under the siege that exceeded his limit. The broken carriage crashed to the ground, and then it burned with raging flames. "Gather, gather!" Pulling out the frost axe, Ogiest roared at the members of the exploration team, intending to reorganize their formation. However, it would be difficult for them to break through the suppression of the Eye of Nightmare for a while. Huaishur flicked her hand and threw the card in her pocket. He summoned the flock of crows again. Holy! The park guards appeared again. The giant rat men covered in steel and power armor roared and rushed into the battlefield, opening up both sides for Huaishur. During the temporary respite, Huaishur had already spotted the commander behind the Eye of Nightmare's formation. He raised the sword of virtue in his hand and pointed it forward. The guards on both sides raised their giant shields and trampled on the mud with a roar. Huaishur broke through the rain curtain and the large group of interceptors in front of him, and pounced towards the core of the Eye of Nightmare. Regardless of whether it succeeded or not, it would involve most of the Eye of Nightmare's energy. It would give Ogiest time to protect the scholars calmly and summon the Frost Giant army. As Huaishur charged forward, the heavy shields of the park guards kept vibrating, letting out sharp sounds of collapse. It was like an iron ball trying to squeeze into solidified butter bit by bit. It was difficult to break through the Eye of Nightmare's defense line, and it was almost destroyed by the recoil and digested by the other party. The Bone Burial Sanctuary opened, and Huaishur's figure suddenly disappeared. He jumped out of the Eye of Nightmare's formation, bringing with him rolling darkness as he tried to counterattack. However, the captain of the command indifferently pulled out the halberd that was inserted into the ground. Under the protection of his subordinates, he counterattacked Huaishur, the captain of the Eye of Nightmare, the experienced Gain. Without the slightest bit of impatience or rash advance, the man commanded his subordinates and steadily maintained a safe distance, wearing down the energy of the park guards. Just as Huaishur was slightly careless, he suddenly roared and slashed with the halberd in his hand. It pierced through the cracks in the heavy shield and pierced through the armored rat men behind him. Blood splattered. After losing the protection of the shield bearers, the guards on the right wing were instantly defeated by the counterattack of the Eye of Nightmare. Huaishur retreated in a sorry state and kept flashing. After losing several guards, he finally rushed out of the encirclement of the Eye of Nightmare. However, when he turned around, he could not help but feel the fury in his heart. In this short period of time, Ogiest had gathered at least half of the members of the exploration team. However, even though he already had the ability to counterattack, he stayed where he was and did not move. He indifferently rejected his subordinates' request for support and allowed Huaishur to struggle among the enemies. "Ogiest, why are you standing there?" he roared angrily. "Are you watching a show?" Ogiest did not answer. In the silence, he looked down at his watch. Through the rapidly rusting dial, he saw the second hand moving and silently counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At the end of the countdown, most of the people around him stiffened. It was as if they could not breathe and pinched their throats in pain. However, they could not touch their faces through the helmet. As they gradually struggled, they began to twitch rapidly. One by one, they fell to the ground. Most of the scholars and alchemists reacted. They wanted to help and escape, but Ogiest raised his hand and fired his crossbow continuously. An arrow with electric light was shot out. Just like that, one by one, their twitching teammates fell to the ground. Ogiest raised his hand and took off the helmet on his face, revealing a pale and indifferent face. He finally answered Huaishi's question. Because I am the traitor. Betrayal always came suddenly. Huaishi was stunned on the spot, dumbfounded and in disbelief. He, who had been jumping around repeatedly, did not become a traitor, and Ogiest, who grew up in the Iron Crystal constellation, actually chose to betray him. However, the scene he had seen under the oil refinery appeared in front of his eyes again. From that time on, Ogiest was no longer a member of the Iron Crystal constellation, right? In the Rain of Blood, Ogiest raised his hand and raised the Nibelungen ring in his hand again, summoning the Frost Giant Legion. However, as soon as the light on the ring lit up, it quickly extinguished. It was dim and had lost all its miraculous power. It was as if he had already made a countermeasure against this. Ogiest raised his eyebrows in understanding. Sure enough, Simon is on guard against me. That old man always seems to be able to guess a little bit of everything. Unfortunately, he always hides his guesses in his heart and doubts them repeatedly, but it is always difficult for him to make a decision. Otherwise, the situation would not have become like this. Simmons Jiang. That was the name of the purser. Perhaps he had already noticed Ogiest's abnormality and understood how paranoid the child he had watched growing up was, but he still could not believe that he would do such a thing. At that moment, Huaishi saw the dagger on his waist and finally understood. Is it because of Kandra? Ogiest did not speak, nor did he refute Huaishi's guess. Are you crazy? Huaishi was furious. Kandra's death was not caused by the Grandmaster. Even if you hate him, you should find the right dash. Kandra is not dead. Ogiest suddenly made a sound, interrupting Huaishi's words. Across the heavy blood rain, Ogiest stared into his eyes and told him word by word. He is still alive. Huaishi was speechless. After being assimilated by hell, who could say for sure whether he was alive or dead? Perhaps as early as the moment of assimilation, Kandra was no longer the person he used to be. No one knew what was left behind. What did the Ivy League give you? Huaishi's expression gradually turned cold, and he pulled out the cold axe blade. Let me guess they can bring Kandra back to life? Just by saying that you believe it, right? I'm a little doubtful whether you have a brain. So, the Grandmaster didn't tell you anything, right? Ogiest's smile became mocking. That guy always likes to pretend to be mysterious. He knows everything, but he doesn't say anything. He keeps saying that the history of hell is insignificant, but in fact, he has been hiding the truth. Just like he won't tell you that the core of eternal frost is here, and he won't tell you that in addition to creating the sun and moon and recreating all things, the group of forgers also really developed the machine of immortality. Huaishi was stunned. Unbelievable. It wasn't that he couldn't believe it was true, but he couldn't believe that Ogiest would actually believe such a thing. He wanted the Ivy League to use the seized machine of immortality to help him resurrect Kandra, but it was simply too ridiculous. In this world, there is only one thing that could truly be immortal, the destruction elemental beasts of immortality. Other than that, even God couldn't do it. Ogiest never understood how nervous the Astronomy Society was about such a taboo. Huaishi didn't even need to use his brain to think. As long as there was a slight possibility that the machine of immortality was real, the Doomsday bell would ring for it. Then, right here, the purification core of the Continuation Academy would descend from the sky and burn everything here along with the entire world. There wouldn't be any residue left. They wouldn't hesitate to write an entire white paper and use up the purification quota within 10 years. However, there wasn't. Countless divination, Bifrost vigilance, countless prophecy props, and even Bifrost time transmission didn't show any signs of it. The Continuation Academy didn't come here. That only proved one thing, that this thing was fake. He couldn't even laugh. It was hard to understand. Do you really believe this nonsense? Do I have any other choice? Ogiest asked back. He seemed to be laughing, but his eyes were burning red in anger. I don't pray for immortality. I just want to see him again. As long as Kandra can come back, I'm willing to do anything. The Grandmaster can obviously do it. He can save Kandra. Ogiest roared. You know it, I know it, and even he himself doesn't deny it. But no matter how I beg and pray, he's not willing to look down. I've exhausted all means. Why, sure, all means, but I have no other choice. Is that so? Huaisher suddenly understood. That's right. Ogiest raised his frost axe and aimed it at Huaisher's face. The time of sorrow is over, Mr. Huaisher. Please surrender. Huaisher sneered. What if I say no? Ogiest waved his hand. A gap suddenly opened in the array of the Eye of Nightmare, revealing the young man with a blade on his neck. Captive. Chapter 585. In the cabin in the woods. Under the suppression, Little 19's face was pale. He smiled at Huaisher with difficulty and opened his mouth to say something, but he couldn't speak because of the sword. Otherwise, he'll die. Ogiest announced indifferently. Why didn't you say so earlier? Huaisher sighed and then raised his voice. Kill him. For a moment, Ogiest was stunned. He took a step forward and told Ogiest in front of him, I don't like this student anymore. If you want to kill him, just kill him. Anyway, I have a cuter one. Logically speaking, a sweet and soft girl should be better, right? Step by step, he said calmly. What's the use of a man? Isn't it good to take all those beautiful girls as students and then develop a few beautiful forbidden teacher-student relationships with my face? With that, Huaisher's smile became more and more cheerful. To tell you the truth, I'm good at tricking little girls. It was that moment of astonishment. Huaisher's figure disappeared, flashed quickly in the air, and disappeared. Shadow Burial shuttled and rushed straight to the cabin in the woods behind the array. Boring trick. Ogiest snorted and chopped down with a frost axe in his hand. In an instant, an ice wall rose from the ground and blocked in front of Huaisher. Then he quickly expanded and turned into a 2-meter-tall giant, chopping down the axe toward Huaisher. The battle began. However, it was not this place. At that moment, just behind Huaisher, there was a flash of lightning suddenly rising. A low roar like a dragon burst out from Tiger's roar. Mountain King chopped down. In an instant, the ice wall in front was cut down with irresistible force. A girl in gray armor flew out of countless splashing ice powder and broke through the blood rain. She seemed to trample on the air and broke through the air full of poison. She fell from the sky. Behind her, the dazzling lightning slowly dissipated, and finally the phantom of the divine mark was revealed. It had the silhouette of a heavenly horse, and its pure white figure appeared in the rain of blood. Its face was like a fox's, and there were horns on its back. Its white body was covered in hair. The dragon-type divine mark inherited from the Yuan clan's Pegasus lineage. Cheng Huang. The moment he appeared, Shan Jun's sword slashed down and tore through the shield and armor in front of him like a hot knife cutting through wax. The terrifying force of impact was transmitted forward along with the impact of Yuan's shoulder. The burly man, who weighed half a ton, was sent flying like a cannonball. The Mountain Lord Heavy sword once again let out a metallic screech, and the bloodthirsty white tiger revealed its true appearance in the void. The ice iron sword swept out, bringing about a tragic stretch of bloody light. An ancient armor appeared above Cheng Huang's projection. The pitch-black armor looked ferocious, making Cheng Huang look even more majestic and cold. It was the arcane armor. In the blink of an eye, he had charged straight in. However, Yuan did not care about the small house in the forest that was close by. Instead, she charged straight to the core of the formation, catching him off guard. When Cheng Huang charged at full speed, coupled with the terrifying lethality of the Mountain Lord Heavy Sword, it brought about a high speed and a huge threat that Huaisher could not hope to match. The general had been famous for 30 years, and the real Cheng Huang had appeared in the human world again. Around Yuan, countless black shadows suddenly flew past and wrapped around the enemies, causing their movements to freeze for a moment. At this moment, life and death were separated. Behind the Eye of Nightmare's formation, a heavy halberd slashed out and blocked in front of Yuan, causing Cheng Huang's charge to pause for a moment. It lost its speed. Kill those two brats. Gaines, who had been through many battles, roared, and attacked Yuan Yuan with all his might. Even if the enemy was a little girl, he would not relax or slack off. The slightly chaotic formation once again regained its order and surrounded Yuan Yuan. On both sides of Lin Shurgio, the warriors of the Eye of Nightmare had already raised their swords and slashed down. What was faster than the sound of the swords was the sound of bones breaking. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed their necks and twisted them abruptly. Around the small house in the forest, crisp cracking sounds could be heard. One body after another fell to the ground, struggling in the rain of blood, but it was difficult for them to get up. The small house in the forest knelt in the blood-colored mud. The panic and fear on his face had disappeared without a trace. It turned into a mocking smile. In his hand, the 8 yuan wooden figurine from the supermarket was being manipulated by his 10 fingers. He quickly twisted its neck, one round, and another round. With every turn, a person's neck would be crushed by the power of the curse. I thought I could fool a few people. In the end, only teacher was fooled. He sighed with some headache. Behind him, the phantom of a giant snake slowly appeared and coiled around his body. On the snake's head, there was a scholar's scarf. It did not look ferocious and terrifying at all. Instead, it was filled with a peaceful and benevolent aura. Only when its eyes occasionally moved would a trace of viciousness and coldness appear. Promotion. One of the third-level stigmata in the path of evil karma. Promotion. Relying on his teacher's cultivation and the instilling of the cage of dreams day and night, as well as the rich resentment in this hell. Lin 19 quietly and secretly advanced without telling anyone. This little brother was obviously very strong, but he was too steady. Originally, he said that he would trick as many people as he could, but he did not expect that his teacher did not notice his hint at all. Although it sounded a little sad that a stinky man was not as good as a fragrant and soft girl, but he still came to save him in a hurry. Could it be that his teacher was its Sunder type? On the battlefield full of danger, the small house in the forest was absent-minded. However, the movements of his hands did not stop at all. Instead, they became more and more agile. With his movements, a dark shadow spread out from under his feet, forming a vicious quagmire. Beheading curse, shadow bind, resentment. Holding Huaishi's blood sample in one hand, Lin 19's smile became more and more cheerful. It's poisonous. I almost forgot. Today, I'll let you idiots know why the Lin family's magician is famous in the abyss. In addition to protecting himself, he even had the strength to support Yuan Yuan, who was deep in the enemy's encirclement, creating a temporary opportunity for her. Holy! In his unconscious admiration, he reached out and poured Huaishi's blood sample into the wind. As the stigmatous snake's forked tongue flickered and silently recited a spell, one after another, dark green little people came out of the mud and went into the crowd. They stepped on the mud and crawled around, climbing up Gaian's leg armor along his ankles. Wherever they went, the steel rusted. Countless mushrooms and thorns quickly grew out of the rust and entangled his body. At that moment, Yuan Yuan raised the blade in her hand. The stigmata relic, Mountain King, roared. The roar was like thunder, instantly setting off a rolling sound wave that spread in all directions. Meanwhile, Cheng Huang's and Shan Jun's phantoms disappeared in an instant, only to be replaced by the hideous silhouettes of the two overlapping sacred marks. The cries of countless beasts overlapped, turning into a distant dragon's roar that resounded through the blood rain. The wind follows the tiger, and the clouds follow the dragon. Between the blood rain and the febrile wind, the Pegasus Cheng Huang, inherited from the dragon's blood, and the Mountain King's stigmata connected and merged into one. They formed a fleeting, hideous shadow. The collision between the stigmata temporarily reversed the flaw of no dragon in the world. With this fake dragon's blood as the source, what appeared was the disaster miracle that combined the power of the Lord of Heaven and Mountain King in the Dongxia source code. Tiger Dragon. The legendary beast reappeared here. Yuan Yuan stepped forward and moved 14 meters forward. As the blade buzzed, it left a beautiful vibrato unique to a violin in the air. It was like a skylark flapping its wings and chirping happily. The blade slashed down from the air with incomparable agility, and the iron light flashed. Then, a blood-colored spring sprayed into the sky and merged with the blood rain, becoming indistinguishable. Guyan, who had experienced the battle, was frozen in place. He staggered a step back and knelt on the ground. On his shoulder, the head slowly slid down. It fell into the mud, and the shock and fear from that moment were still lingering. Decapitation. The tiger dragon stigmata only existed for a moment before it quickly disintegrated. The Mountain King returned to the stigmata relic, and Cheng Huang reappeared. After the successful attack, Yuan Yuan did not try to create more results. Instead, she took advantage of this gap and quickly retreated. She pulled Lin Shurjiu by the back of his collar. When the Eye of Nightmare sensed Guyan's death and tried to chase after him in a rage, a low rumble sounded from the rain behind them. 1, 2, 3. Countless black shadows emerged from the blood-colored rain. It was an array that was galloping over. The pitch-black Naga army. For the Ring of Eternity. The Naga elder, wearing a breathing device, pulled out his scimitar and shouted angrily, "The time of war is coming. The enemy is right in front." Countless scimitars were pulled out of their sheaths and attacked the minotaurs at the outermost periphery. Then it was the gargoyles. Those huge and ferocious figures instantly pounced down from the rain. After setting off a rain of blood, they threw their spears. Then, without caring about anything else, they quickly picked up the explorers and scholars who could not move on the ground and sent them to the rear. See how timely the reinforcements are? Huaishir mocked, slashed, and forced Ogius to retreat. However, Ogius did not respond. He was still expressionless. Instead, he raised his head and looked at the northern sky. Accompanied by a loud noise, a hurricane swept over from afar. The rain of blood shook, forming a red tornado that rose from the ground. In the sky, in the battle between the dome giant and the alien underworld, the power from the sub-control core had been exerted on the entire land of the Twilight Village. There was a rumble that sounded like the collapse of a mountain. At that moment, blazing lightning suddenly rose from the central tower and flew in all directions. Just as everyone turned around in shock, they saw that the towering tower had separated from the foundation of the earth. It was as if it had been forcibly uprooted from the ground by an invisible force and stood above the sky. The earth shook violently. From all over the Twilight Village, countless huge machines and debris rose into the air. They were pulled by an invisible force and gathered toward the center. With the suspended tower as the backbone, they quickly closed and pieced together. As if they were growing, they derived a complicated structure like the palace in the sky. Bursts of light and heat brewed in it. They forcefully propped up the natural disasters formed by countless curses, creating a peaceful area around the tower. Such a scene seemed familiar. Huaishir subconsciously held his breath. He felt countless, inexplicable fragments flashing through his consciousness. Along with them, there was also the illusion of wailing. The records from thousands of years ago once again echoed in Huaishir's consciousness, bringing indescribable fear and uneasiness. It was the eternal frost furnace. After a long period of silence, the omnipotent perpetual motion machine was waking up. Chapter 586. At this moment, with the strange changes in the central tower, even the ground under their feet was shaking violently and falling apart. Amidst the violent tremors, the land bulged and floated in the air. They collided with each other and began to rise under the gravity of the tower. Countless bridges extended from the top of the tower, as if they were growing, connecting the massive buildings and plots of land that came from all directions. The long warm-up had begun. Not long after, the Eternal Frost Core would reveal its true appearance. In a moment of shock, Huaishir and Ogius quickly retreated and reorganized their formation, trying to prevent their side from being separated in this violent turbulence. But then, they found that the ground they were on seemed to be being pulled to the tower. What was going on? Taking the elevator? Or directly? But just by looking at the invisible gravitational force emitted by the crown on the dome giant's head and the lightning guide rope that fell from the sky of the underworld, they knew that this situation was not accidental. The people from both sides, scattered everywhere, were being continuously thrown into the central tower by the miraculous carvings above their heads in order to gain the upper hand. When they noticed this situation, the members of the Iron Crystal Constellation and the Ivory Tower looked at each other with unfriendly gazes. Although according to the technical ability of both sides, as long as they did not die on the spot, they could always be pulled back. But people could make mistakes, just like horses could stumble. In an emergency situation, the emergency rune that could instantly freeze the vital organs would also fail, let alone the large group of people who were used as tools by both sides. The battle that stopped abruptly broke out again at this moment. Just before the two armies, Huaishir's movements suddenly stopped. As if hit by something invisible, he flew into the air and landed awkwardly. He flew into the air inexplicably and fell into the dust inexplicably. It was hard to understand. It was as if he was shot by a sniper rifle. After a brief numbness on his back, there was a sharp pain. Something penetrated Huaishir's lungs. But when he looked down at his chest in a daze, he could not see the wound. There was not even blood. Dizziness came suddenly. Huaishir's vision suddenly turned black. In the distance, under the thick clouds, an aircraft seemed to be nailed to the air, hovering precisely in the storm. No matter how the torrential rain and bloody wind blew, he did not waver in the slightest. The gun, which was more than 2 meters long, was still aimed straight at Huaishir's position. The colonel was crouching in the cabin. Through the scope, he could not see the scene clearly. Relying on Ivy's superb material science foundation and extreme shooting ability, he created an experimental product and completed a super long-range sniper attack of 26 kilometers. The error did not exceed 10 centimeters. It was perfect. The troop member beside the colonel, the doctor, was half kneeling on the ground, holding a complicated telescope in his hand and constantly adjusting the parameters. When he clearly saw the figure lying on the ground in a sorry state, he was immediately overjoyed. It hit. Can you really hit him? The colonel was in disbelief. As expected, we've been misled all along. The professor smiled and said he has some kind of instinctive intuition towards death. It's so sensitive that he can detect anything that can hurt him, regardless of whether it's a killing intent or not. I've seen such a record in the history of the Ivy League, but it's not impossible to verify. The doctor said, no matter how keen his intuition is, as long as it can't kill him or even make him bleed or hurt, it won't be within his sensing range. This was the gift they had prepared for Huaishir's death premonition, the gift that the Ivy League had prepared. Can it really work? The colonel was skeptical. It was originally prepared for the two old guys, Simon and Forster. It's not a bad thing to use it on him. The doctor explained, have you heard of the Faceless Man's antidote? The colonel pondered for a long time before he reacted. I always thought it was just a legend. Yes. The doctor sighed. I thought so too before I saw it. Antidote. The alchemy potion that had once appeared in the markets of the border and hell was not so much a poison or a curse, but an unfinished blessing. It was originally created for the sublimator who had chosen the wrong path during the advancement. It could allow a person's stigmata to roll back to the previous stage without any repercussions. Just like the legendary white wolf hook of the Middle East, the American solar calendar, the Russian Federation's cross of repentance, and other authoritative relics. Unfortunately, for some reason that even the creator himself did not understand, when the reversal began, the original stigmata did not disappear. Instead, it entered a virtual state that even the sublimata himself could not detect. Once the effect of the potion was over for half an hour, it would quickly return to its original state. The defects and pain that should have existed could not be avoided. During this process, no matter what was done, there would be no effect and no change would be of any help. After all, it was an unfinished product, but soon someone found other uses for it. For example, assassination and poisoning. It was rumored that the creator of the antidote disappeared because of this. Until today, no one had found his trace, and no one had found the complete formula of the antidote. It could not be reproduced. At the same time, it also meant that its effect was incurable. Sometimes, even without the need to make a move, the effect of the reversal was enough to cause serious damage to the sublimator. Just like now, in the midst of the chaos, Huaisher staggered and fell to the ground, bending over in pain. He pulled off the small respirator hanging on his face and opened his mouth, but he could not breathe. He felt that his stigmata was rapidly shrinking. The sacred burial ground around him began to rapidly fade, but the source substance was scattered and began to riot. His brain was buzzing. It was difficult to control. The reversal began. Stigmata, young master of life, dissipated. What the hell? On the ruins of another plot of land, Raymond looked at the scene displayed on the screen from the truck, dumbfounded. Huaisher was sniped, but where was the sniper? No matter how he scanned and observed with his radar, he could not find the sniper's position. It was not until the search range was expanded to the maximum that he could distinguish the signal of a Griffin aircraft from the countless noises. The distance was 31 kilometers. Raymond did not hesitate and waved his hand. Under the cracked armor of the truck, the heavy cannon suddenly rose, adjusted the angle, corrected the coordinates, and locked onto the aircraft far away in the sky. The furnace of the Chariot of Fate began to operate urgently, overdrive. A blazing light brewed in the cannon, about to launch a retaliatory counterattack. But before that, the ear-piercing threat alarm had already exploded in Raymond's ears. Instinctively, he turned the cannon and aimed behind him. Fire! A mighty stream of light gushed out, engulfing the figure that walked out of the ruins. Then, the heat that was enough to burn an entire building was split in half, in front of an overly large heavy sword with a shield. The blood-colored shadow of Azura rose into the air. Immersed in blood and death, not heaven, raised his eyes and smashed the Vajra in his hand forward. In that instant, the cannon was actually split into two in the middle of the slash. When the cannon made of pure heat slowly dissipated, the dull sound of lava flowing could be heard. On the ground that had been burned red, an armored figure slowly walked towards Raymond. Raymond was already frozen on the spot. He could not move as he was stared at by that pair of old eyes. Hey, isn't this too much? He swallowed his saliva dryly. Didn't you say that Tier 4 can't participate in the war? The contract, that's right. The captain of the Eye of Nightmare, Silent Avery, raised his hand and took off his ferocious lion helmet, revealing his cold face. I didn't participate in the struggle between the Ivy League and the Ivory Tower. He calmly told the man in front of him, I came here only to purge the traitors under my sect and wash away the shame. Raymond did not say anything. His fingers that were hanging by his waist twitched as if he was trying to hold something tightly, but he grabbed nothing. He was slightly stunned for a moment, and his expression gradually became bitter. AI fully stared at his waist and asked indifferently, why? Leonard, where's your sword? It's broken a long time ago, teacher. Raymond sighed and slowly raised his hands. Can I surrender? I can kneel down now, as long as you can keep me alive, even if I have to break my own hands and feet. As for money, we can discuss any amount. I've saved up a sum of money over the years, and it's not a small amount. As long as you can open the net. But his voice was interrupted. Avery looked at him. There was no pity or gentleness in his eyes. There was only a cold calmness. It seems that the bones are broken together with the sword. Raymond was stunned on the spot. After a long time, he lowered his head weakly. Yes, it's all broken. Why can't you let me go? He asked. Why do you have to make things difficult for a knight who doesn't even have a mount? You see, for a disgraceful person like me, even if you don't care about me, there will be a day when I die a horrible death, right? Why do you have to do it yourself? It's useless to say more. Draw your weapon, Leonard, son of the Red Dragon. Avery held the end of the heavy sword with both hands and announced indifferently, Let me see how much you've improved since the battle at the Farbach mansion. How far have you fallen after losing your Red Dragon? In the dead silence, Raymond sighed. Is there no other choice? AI fully nodded in understanding. Are these your last words? No, I'm just... Raymond opened his mouth to explain. Then, the silent cannon beside him seemed to finally be unable to watch any longer. As a passerby, it spoke up to help Leonard. Unfortunately, it didn't say, "I'm telling you the truth," or "indeed." What came out of the cannon was a terrifying light that was not inferior to the previous attack. Avery sighed. He wasn't stunned, wasn't shocked, and even couldn't help but want to laugh. He raised the blade in his hand and slashed down again. He easily tore apart the cannon attack in front of him. But Raymond's figure could no longer be seen on the spot. The ruins were a mess. The truck and Raymond had disappeared without a trace. In the distance, they could see a truck that had changed beyond recognition. It was like a spider that had grown 8 legs and was carrying Raymond as it sped away. The speed was unbelievably fast. Ran away. It was an expected result. Avery didn't chase after him. Instead, he sat on a rock, supported himself with his sword, and began to take a short break. "Run, Leonard. Before fate comes, how far can you run?" He murmured softly as he stared at the resolute face reflected on the sword's spine. "This is the last bit of benevolence your teacher has for you." At this moment, on the countless pieces of land floating in the air, on the huge platform of one of the dozens of battlefields that were constantly splitting and merging as Huaishir fell to the ground, everyone present on both sides noticed his abnormality. The billowing darkness of the bone-burying sanctuary quickly dissipated, and the burning flag disappeared without a trace. The figure that fell to the ground was revealed. He tried to support his body with difficulty, but then the face quickly disintegrated. Countless dark green colors emerged from the blood vessels and quickly spread, covering his entire body in an instant. He looked at his hands in disbelief. "This is teacher." Yuan widened her eyes and wanted to rush over. However, Huaishir raised his hand with all his might and shouted at her in panic, "Don't come over. I want to." As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying explosion burst out from Huaishir's body. The turbulent dust and air waves swept through, engulfing the thin figure and spreading in all directions. Not only did the Eye of Nightmare, who wanted to snatch the head, but even Yuan and the other members of the exploration team were sent flying backward, unable to get close. Countless dark green things that looked like blood splashed out. Amidst the violent explosion, only a broken sword blade flew out. It stabbed into the ground diagonally. It made a low sound. "What the hell?" On the aircraft in the distance, the colonel and the doctor also looked at the scene through the telescope in shock, unable to accept it. Even the two of them did not expect such an outcome. What kind of hidden dangers did that guy plant when he leveled up? Now that the reversal medicine had taken effect, the source substance had immediately lost control and self-destructed. Soon, countless crackling sounds tore through the lingering sound of the explosion and spread out from the scattered dust. In the center of the explosion, a staggering figure walked out with difficulty. However, as he walked, countless thorns, poisonous flowers, and ferocious giant trees broke out of the mud. Those sharp trees crazily stretched out in all directions, spreading, growing, and dying. With a flick of the finger, countless lives and deaths gathered around him, forming a complicated and huge cycle. A sudden gust of wind swept past, sweeping away the dancing dust, revealing Huaishir's face. She was completely at a loss. She had no idea what had just happened. 2 intersecting dark green curse marks covered his face, but they did not show any ferociousness or gloominess. Instead, they looked holy and benevolent. He looked at his hands and was puzzled. "I advanced again." Chapter 587. "Oh my God, what's going on?" Huaishir turned pale with fright the moment he came to his senses. How did I become a traitor? After inexplicably turning back into a mountain ghost, he could no longer control the rampaging origin substance and the vitality in his body that was about to explode. He had advanced again, but the problem was his advancement was the path of the Azure Emperor. At this moment, not only Huaishir, but even the person from Mount Yudai and the Mystic Bird, who was reviewing official documents, raised their heads in shock. One of them felt that a towering tree had suddenly appeared in his courtyard, while the other took out the authoritative relic painting scroll and flipped to the part about the third level. He looked at the name on the light and repeatedly confirmed it. He felt that he was starting to get bald. He couldn't figure out what Huaishir was doing. There was suddenly another person in the Dongsha genealogy. Were you surprised? Were you surprised? Suddenly, the old man had the urge to vomit blood. Why didn't you stay in the celestial genealogy? Why did you come to the Dongsha genealogy? In particular, this person's correction value had actually started to rise. The power from the golden amber, Demeter, directly moved the endless forest around Canberra and stuffed 1/50,000th of the correction value into Huaishir's body. In other words, according to the judgment of the heavens, Huaishir had at least 1/50,000th of the contribution in the fertilization of the entire Australian soil. Even if it wasn't much, as a sacred mark of the Azure Emperor, as long as he participated, he could obtain terrifying growth. He directly reached the maximum level on the spot, the third level of perfection. Now, Huaishir felt that it was difficult to breathe. This was because when his lungs inhaled and exhaled, what surged was a torrent of life force that was like a tidal wave. The life force extended from his limbs and bones, and had already formed the enormous, illusory image of Mount Udai. He could even feel a sense of mockery coming from the border from a distant space. Although he didn't know what was going on, a certain heartless old lady first mocked him here, and then the mystic bird said that they would do it together. Little brother, what's wrong with you? I have to say, Huaishir slowly raised his head and sighed at the enemies in front of him. Although I don't know what happened, I feel that this is definitely your fault. As he spoke, poisonous vines, evil grasses, and man-eating flowers rose from the ground beneath his feet one after another. It was full of vitality. However, Huaishir's heart was cold. He pitted himself for risking his life for celestial genealogy for so many years. He had been loyal to celestial genealogy, but who would have thought that he would fail miserably and be forced to become a traitor? They would rather hide in the dark and shoot in the dark than betray Huaishir. What kind of F***King international traitor spirit does Ivy Lee have? Fortunately, he could feel that the divine mark in his body was essentially the reflection of the moon in the well, like a flower in the water. As long as he trampled on it a few more times, it would collapse at any time. He still had the possibility of rejoining the team. Otherwise, he would have burst into tears by now. However, Huaishir immediately discovered the advantage of the Dongsha genealogy. After removing the adaptability to hell, at the same time, there was no potential danger of being eroded by the records of hell. In an instant, the sorrowful cries that had been lingering in his ears for the past few days disappeared without a trace. He felt as if he had been reborn, feeling refreshed, especially when Huaishir opened his arms and propped up the huge and complicated network of vitality on his body. The shadow of Mount Udai instantly shrouded the entire land. Endless vitality flourished in the soil that was soaked in blood rain. Even if it was full of poison to humans, it was a heaven-like world for plants that didn't fear death. As the shadow expanded, the main trunk appeared proudly under the entanglement of countless vitality. It reflected its own figure in hell. Even Huaishir was stunned when he raised his head. This was because his divine mark wasn't the hibiscus tree, which was famous for its majesty and glory on the Azure Emperor's path. Instead, it was a tree with no canopy and no forks. It seemed to be connected to the heavens and the earth. It had become the backbone of the network of vitality, supporting the terrifying scale of Mount Udai on its own. This network of vitality had completely manifested. It wasn't the hibiscus tree. It was the creation tree. At this moment, however, it wasn't just here. When the creation tree fully unfurled, it was like a giant pillar that supported the heavens and the earth. It extended upwards, gradually dimming and dissipating, but the top couldn't be seen. It took root downwards, piercing through the soil and connecting to the ground below. However, its roots couldn't be seen. It was like a pillar of green light enveloped Huaishir's body. The other two ends actually pierced deeply into the endless curses of the Twilight Village. The blood rain above, the gray waves below, it began to extract the curses that were everywhere, transforming them into origin substances that spontaneously transformed Huaishi's surroundings. When the creation tree, combined with the hundreds of thousands of different types of vitality on Mount Yudai, it actually formed a structure that resembled a miniature frame. The projection of Mount Yudai into this hell. Even Huaishi was scared out of his wits. He had wanted to try it out, but he hadn't expected the old lady to be so generous as to let him borrow it. She had allowed a traitor like him to borrow the Azure Emperor's power, even if it was just a projection, to do as he pleased. There was a feeling of being overwhelmed by the favor. Am I really that popular? I should go back and apologize to her. In the blink of an eye, such a shocking transformation had already befallen Huaishi. In the blink of an eye, the old hen had turned into a cruiser. The young arbiter of life, whose divine mark had been retreating, suddenly transformed and leveled up again. Not only that, but she had also borrowed a set of divine equipment. When Huaishi raised his eyes and stared at the formation in front of him, as well as the rain of javelins thrown by the Minotaurs, he revealed a joyful smile. This was interesting. Casually, Huaishi pulled out the sword of virtue from the ground beside him and pointed it forward. In an instant, countless trees stood side by side, extracting the vitality of the decay in the blood rain. They grew crazily and turned into a row of high walls, covering the front of Huaishi. Accompanied by violent tremors, the ferocious and twisted wooden walls kept making cracking sounds. Soon, they withered rapidly in the blink of an eye and fell back into the mud with the javelins all over their bodies. They grew too quickly and withered too quickly. It was difficult for pure matter to grow in an instant, and it was destined not to last. Since that was the case, he would change his method. He raised his hand. In front of hundreds of eyes of nightmare, Huaishi snapped his fingers. In an instant, the builder tree shook, and in the projection of the huge mountain range's vitality, countless green lights descended from the sky and landed on every Snake Man undead army. In an instant, a circle of faintly discernible sharp thorns formed around their bodies. Super wide-area thorny halo. With such a terrifying scale, not only were the enemies stunned, even the elders were stunned on the spot. They were shocked by the sudden blessing and almost couldn't hold their swords and sabers. In just a snap of his fingers, Huaishi's origin form was depleted, but in the blink of an eye, it was replenished by the origin form absorbed from the disasters and curses. Is this the pleasure of a nanny? I love it. Huaishi smiled and snapped his fingers for the second time. The green light descended from the sky again and entered the bodies and mounts of every undead army, quickly transforming into pure vitality, healing their wounds, replenishing their blood, and dispelling all scars. Huaishi felt as if he had transformed into a human-shaped war and peace, with endless halos and blessings for him to squander. When he snapped his fingers for the third time, all the undead army shrouded in the vitality network suddenly expanded, and dark green light shot out from their eyes. After Huaishi adjusted the type of vitality network to the most suitable environment for the undead army, it was as if this Snake Man settlement had returned to the sacred forest that only appeared in the legends of their ancestors. Endless vitality poured into their bodies as if it was free of charge. They could not wait to roar and gallop, wanting to shed some blood, whether it was their own or the enemy's. In that instant, the mighty undead army actually collided head-on with the Minotaur's defense line while galloping. For the Ring of Eternity, the elder pulled off his cumbersome mask, raised the flag with one hand, and pulled out the spear on his back with the other. He roared, "For eternal victory!" They were clearly light cavalry, but they seemed to be heavy cavalry covered in armor. They chose the cruelest and most violent charging formation. When the dark green torrent collided with the high black wall, a loud, tragic sound reverberated in everyone's ears. Just like a flood breaking through a dam, the earth-shattering tremors suddenly spread. Countless iron shards and blood spread forward like sand. The elder's body was instantly penetrated by 2 short spears, but his spear was wedged deeply into the Minotaur warrior's face. The huge lizard lifted its legs and stomped on the prey in front of it. The elder had already pulled out the spear on his body and stabbed forward in a frenzy. The wound quickly closed under Huaishi's control and disappeared, leaving only faint traces of wood. What was originally a fatal injury was now a controllable hidden injury. When the frenzied undead army discovered this, they truly became an undead army that did not fear death. The war horn sounded once again. The roar of "For the Ring of Eternity" sounded from the torn again. Wherever it passed, the defensive formation that the Minotaurs were so proud of actually fell apart like a jar. The tragic song of blood and blood once again played on this piece of land. It was one-sided, pressing forward. Prepare to give the order to retreat. 26 kilometers away, the colonel slowly raised his head from the scope and said to the pale-faced doctor, "Give up on the victory in that area. While the organization is still there, assign them to other areas." The doctor was silent for a moment, then said dryly, "I will take responsibility for this." "It's not your responsibility alone." The colonel sighed. Now it seems that Huaishi's threat level is still higher than expected. Maybe Pandalong will mobilize the entire troop to deal with him alone. The two looked at each other and did not say anything. The aircraft quickly ascended and disappeared into the clouds. Chapter 588. Perhaps the projection of Mount Tai was too stable, but after more than half an hour, the projection of the Jinmu tree slowly dissipated along with the collapse of the sacred mark. Huaisha couldn't help but want to cry when he experienced the return of young Master Ming and the bone-burying sanctuary. It wasn't because he was moved. It was because it was too uncomfortable. It was as if he was kicked into a gas chamber after getting used to the fresh air. It was difficult to breathe. Celestial genealogy was very sensitive to records, not to mention that Huaisha still had the Book of Destiny. The history left behind in hell would almost instinctively entangle his soul. The intense dizziness was even stronger than before. The moment he recovered, Huaisha staggered, and darkness appeared in front of his eyes. He fell into a nightmarish illusion again. Only one step left. A figure with a pipe in his mouth leaned over, and his blurry face seemed to be smiling. "Soon, hell will become heaven. True power will be born in your hands, eternal and undying." He reached out his hand and offered salvation to Huaisha in the quagmire. But when Huaisha clenched his hand, what he felt was not happiness and peace, but indescribable despair. At that moment, he fell into an even deeper abyss. Countless twisted limbs entangled his body, pulling him down into an even darker place. "Please save me," a hoarse prayer echoed in his ears, and he kept screaming, "Please, so annoying." In his dizziness, Huaisha roared and slashed down with his axe. "You've all been dead for tens of millions of years, and your ashes are gone. How can I save you? Do you want me to give up my body for you to come back to life?" The darkness shattered. At that moment, Huaisha opened his eyes. He tried his best to breathe. Yuan looked at Huaisha's face uneasily. "Teacher, are you okay?" "It's just a nightmare." Huaisha shook his head and subconsciously pressed on the needle hole on his arm. If it wasn't for the great Grandmaster's spiritual substance stabilizer, he might have been dragged deeper into the records, and it would be difficult for him to break free from the past history of this land. It was just like the first time he had used the Book of Destiny. He had almost been trapped in the library of the abyss of hell. Now, Huaisha didn't know if it was because of the increase in height or because of the reactivation of the Twilight Village, but he discovered that the broken records in the air were becoming more and more active. It was as if it was radiating from a huge gravitational source. There was something like a star that was constantly radiating endless pain and despair in all directions. Sunmaker. Huaisha's expression changed as he suddenly noticed this. With the activation of the Dusk Village and the activation of the Eternal Core, the Sunmaker hidden in the depths of hell would definitely awaken once more. He might even recover to his peak state from thousands of years ago. an existence that led a world to its final destruction, if compared to the present natural enemy? This thought made Huaishi's hair stand on end. He looked up at the huge projection of a domed giant and the iron crystal throne floating in the sky. He didn't believe that the Grandmaster hadn't guessed this. But just what did he mean? Just what was this place? Chaotic thoughts constantly emerged in Huaishi's mind. It felt like he was just a little bit away from the final truth, but he couldn't truly touch it. In his countless thoughts, he had brushed past that crucial point countless times, until the final rumble interrupted his thoughts. At that moment, as the rising ground came to an abrupt stop, Huaishi finally arrived at the central tower. And it was also at that moment that the long warm-up finally came to an abrupt end. The eternal core, activate. What followed was a tide that filled all the gaps between heaven and earth. It tore at everyone's consciousness and soul, and it was a loud noise that was enough to drag everyone's soul into hell. This was a sorrowful cry that filled all of hell. What the hell is this? Huaishi looked up in a daze, his vision turning dark. He staggered forward, wanting to take a closer look. However, at this moment, countless pitch-black mud appeared between the countless complicated machines and massive structures on the tall tower that had suddenly opened up. From the cracks, from the sealed cabin, from every corner. This was a strange substance that Huaishi had seen before. A liquid as viscous as pitch surged in every nook and cranny. Deformed objects that looked like limbs popped out from it endlessly, like the spasming of a dying person trying to grab anything within reach. In vain, they sought expectations that didn't exist. Sunmaker, please be merciful. Countless distorted faces overlapped each other, constantly emerging from within. As the perpetual motion core operated, they screamed hoarsely, emitting tragic cries. Don't go, don't leave, don't give up. Please save me, please bestow salvation. At that moment, Huaishi froze in place, frozen by the sorrowful cries that assaulted his face. The pain was like a tidal wave, with no end in sight, turning into a monstrous frenzy. In the darkness, countless broken records turned into the hell and abyss from thousands of years ago, engulfing him. It was like a bystander walking between the curtains of a play. In an instant, he saw the decay of all things, the arrival of the end, the extinguishment of the sun and the moon, and the drying up of the earth. He saw the huge world sank in a hell bit by bit. He also saw how everything that was beyond recognition was rebuilt by them. In order to save the world, they rebuilt heaven and earth. In order to return to paradise, they rebuilt all things. Trees made of iron, birds made of bronze, beasts made of steel, and even stars made of silver. In the end, the power of eternity descended on this paradise, and the hell of despair followed. From the moment the sun that represented salvation rose, the changes that the Sunmakers had never imagined enveloped the entire hell. The happy smiles on their faces gradually stiffened, and then they quickly cracked and fell apart. Under the illumination of the eternal sun, the eternal life finally ushered in the final transformation. After the broken body like porcelain, what flowed out was viscous sludge like asphalt. Then, one by one, they involuntarily flew to the tower like components and integrated into the core of eternal frost. They cried out in indescribable pain, but there was no relief. In endless despair, they yearned for an end, but the end would not come. The Sunmakers finally understood what had happened, but everything was already irreversible. Their eternal life had begun. As Huaishi walked through this hell in a daze, she was surrounded by countless sharp screeches and shrieks. When had this hell ever been born because of failure? He finally understood how the so-called perpetual motion machine was created. What kind of method was used to achieve the endless and eternal power? Recasting heaven and earth, the sun, the moon, and all things, rebuilding the world, the eternal machine, and the eternal power that maintained the foundation of all worlds, the core of eternal frost. They had indeed done it. They had not failed. They were all still alive. All of them. In this hell that they had created with their own hands. The so-called machine of immortality and the furnace of eternal frost were the same thing. And the power source of the furnace of eternal frost was all the people in this hell who had used the machine of eternal life in order to survive. They had all been assimilated by hell and turned into something that was neither human nor ghost, hanging in the furnace's core. It was like an inexhaustible battery. In the endless pain, endless despair was produced, turning into an inexhaustible source of energy and power for the workshop masters of hell. There was no relief. Thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, in the endless and eternal time, they cried out in sorrow, until they reached the end of destruction, the deepest part of the abyss. Now, Huaisher finally understood where everything she saw in the illusion came from, and who was the one who had witnessed the destruction in front of her. Sunmaker, the honorable supreme one. Countless wriggling and distorted crazy faces emerged from the sludge, staring at Huaisher. No, staring at the former Sunmaker, calling in vain. Please, please have mercy. This time Huaisher finally heard their words clearly. Please, save us. Countless wails sounded again. They called out in pain, longed, and hoped that the last hero would bring them a miracle. It contained their last hope and humble prayers. Please kill us. This was their last wish. But even so, it was already a luxurious dream that could not be realized. They had used all methods and tried all possibilities until even the other kingmakers lost the power to resist and gradually turned into sludge. There was no longer any hope for this land to survive. Only the Sunmaker was left to wander around this empty hell in a daze. Don't be afraid. I will save you. I can definitely save you. Definitely. He repeated over and over again, murmuring in a hollow voice. So, please, wait for me. This was the desperate wail of the last survivor in the endless eternity. Please, don't abandon me. He didn't know how much time had passed or what else he had experienced. Too many records filled Huaisher's soul. The fall of the Twilight Village, the forging of the eternal frozen furnace core, the descent of the Hell Workshop Masters, and the failure of countless resistance. Too much history and too much pain were carried in the Sunmaker's records and engraved in this hell. Just watching from the sidelines would be infected by the endless despair. Huaisher felt himself falling faster and faster and began to dissolve. He had already entered too deep. Just like before, he was attracted by the gravity of hell and began to assimilate step by step, until a cracked palm grabbed his shoulder and pulled him up, causing the assimilation of hell to come to an abrupt end. Then, with the last of his strength, he pushed upwards. He wanted to leave this endless nightmare. Chandra? At the last moment, Huaisher saw a familiar uniform and a face that had been transformed by a machine, and the lips that opened and closed with difficulty. He bid farewell to the world silently, with a smile. Chapter 589. In the dust of despair, Huaisher opened his eyes. As if he didn't hear the shouts of Yuan Yuan and Lin Shizhou beside him, he propped himself up and looked up at the tower in front of him. It was the final masterpiece of the makers and the cage of suffering that had imprisoned them for thousands of years. This was the eternal frost furnace. It was a creation of despair formed by countless sufferings, the essence of disaster and hell. As long as it woke up, there would be endless wails. As long as it operated, the entire hell would be driven by it. Eternal dusk. In comparison, the curse of day and night here was just the radiation leaked by the furnace. In order to resist hell, they chose to struggle desperately. Under the guidance and temptation of the Purgatory Workshop Master, the makers walked step by step into the desperate situation called eternity. They became more and more desperate and crazy. Perhaps the moment they refused a peaceful death and chose to make a deal with the devil, they were destined to fall into a situation more tragic than death. But was all of this brought on by themselves? Huaisher was silent and didn't speak. It was a critical time now. Even if the tower was in front of him, even if the situation was good, he sat on the ground, raised his head without saying a word, and stared at the sky. In the silence, everyone was quietly waiting for his order. But the order didn't come. Sir, why sure? After a long silence, the elder finally said, the opportunity can't be missed. I know. Why sure said, I'm just thinking. Then he didn't say anything else, and no one disturbed Huaishi's thinking. In this way, amidst the thunder and loud noises in the distance, Huaishir quietly stared at the blood rain, the febrile wind, and the gray tide in the sky. This world was full of disaster and despair. Finally, he spoke. Great Master, can you hear me? I'm here. A voice with a metallic texture sounded in the air, as calm as ever. No, it should be said that it was indifferent. He said, you have a question to ask me, right? Huaishir didn't speak. He just waited in silence. I know what you want to ask. Huaishir, the Great Master said. The Great Grandmaster said, you want to ask, have I known all along? Did I know it from the start? Do I have any special arrangements? Do I have a solution? Just like the blue-skinned robots in the comics, omnipotent, always able to find a tool to solve the problem, and can I save them, right? Huaishir lowered his eyes and sighed silently. Even if you knew in your heart that all of this was irreversible thousands of years ago, when they persisted in seeking salvation from hell, the outcome was already decided. Just like the celestial genealogy in the past, she thought she could soar, but in fact, she only fell into the deeper darkness. Even if Condra's example is right in front of us, after a short pause, the Great Grandmaster asked again, even so, do you still have expectations for me? That's right. Huaishir nodded slowly and finally made sound. You should have known the answer long ago, right? Yes, he said. Then, tell me, do you need my answer? The Great Grandmaster said coldly. I can give you an order. You don't need to think about anything, and you don't need to hesitate. You just need to do it. All the responsibilities are not on you. But Huaishir, do you really need someone else to give you an order and help you make a decision? In silence, Huaishir lowered his head and stared at the long sword on his knee. On the quiet blade, his eyes were reflected. They were extremely calm, without any fluctuations. He suddenly asked, will you oppose me, Great Grandmaster? What if I will? The Great Grandmaster's tone was still without any fluctuations. Huaishir did not answer. He just held the handle of the blade, but the irreconcilable answer had been given by his eyes reflected on the ridge of the sword. The kind of eyes in silence, the Great Grandmaster on the iron crystal seat suddenly laughed softly. It was full of mockery and sarcasm. At this moment, he finally felt that this was the successor that Luo so had chosen. That old bastard did not lie to him. What he saw now was more anger, compassion, and decisiveness than when he was young, and more importantly, cruelty. No one will praise you. Huaishir. No one will express their blessings and gratitude. He said, no matter how much you do, you will not be able to bring salvation to this land. At best, it would just be a late end. I know. What you bring is not salvation. Huaishir nodded. I know. Very good. The Great Grandmaster finally raised his eyes and told him, you are the highest person in charge of the iron crystal seat, Huaishir, even if only for this moment. Now, since you have made a decision, your time has come. No one should be able to stop you. As long as you live in the world, mistakes are inevitable. If you want to try, I will not stop you. He playfully quoted the dialogue between God and the devil in Faust, allowing Huaishir to act willfully. I understand. Huaishir slowly stood up, propped up his sword, and finally said, thank you, Mr. Mikhail. The Great Grandmaster did not say anything else. He had already left the ground. On the bridge of the iron crystal seat, the metal giant with his arms crossed retracted his gaze and turned to look at the projection behind him. See, Russell, he said impatiently. The representative you've chosen has already received my vote. Announce the results of the vote. 4-1, with one abstention. The resolution is passed. In the projection in the conference room, Russell announced the results. Whether it's him or you, go ahead and do it, Mikhail. I will bear all the consequences. The overlapping of events, the convergence of cause and effect, the time, place, people, and events, all the prerequisites have been met. Let us draw the final curtain. Following Russell's words, all the members in the conference room looked up and guided the descent of heaven. Under the great Grandmaster's control, the huge secret apparatus left behind by the Republic was awakened. The array enveloped, and the framework was established out of thin air. All the engines of the iron crystal seat instantly entered an overloaded state. A huge miracle suddenly appeared and descended on the ship, causing the huge iron crystal seat to be unable to withstand it. It emitted a low rumble from the overclocked operation. The countless records in hell were captured by this huge gravitational force and gathered inwards. A huge amount of source substance poured in, slowly forming the shadow of a thick book. There was no title on the cover, only countless illusory characters flashing and drifting. They began to search for the main axis that pierced through the core from the billions of fragments. The hell alchemy that was once unique to celestial genealogy reappeared. Gather the phenomena and gather the souls. The essence of hell was about to be reborn here. Under the tower, Huai sure stood up. He didn't know if it was because he had finally made up his mind or because he was no longer swayed, but the entangled precipitation of hell could no longer affect him. The wailing was still ear-piercing. However, Huaishi's heart had unexpectedly calmed down, without any ripples. He looked up at the elder who had been waiting beside him for a long time and asked, "Is something the matter?" "Yes," the elder said. "Your students have just captured Ogiest." Huaishi was slightly stunned. It wasn't that he didn't believe in Yuan and Lin Shurgio, but Ogiest's strength was already at the peak of the 3rd level. He had been carefully nurtured by the ivory tower since he was young, and his accumulation of experience was astonishing. None of those who could survive in hell for so long were easy to deal with. Even if his 2 students joined forces, they might not be able to do anything to him. To be exact, he stood in place by himself, as if he was stupid and didn't move at all, the elder said. He didn't say anything when we asked him, as if he had given up on resisting. "We don't know what to do for a while." "Where is he?" Huaishir said. "Bring him over for me to see." Soon, Ogiest, who was shackled, was escorted by his former colleagues and sent to Huaishir. His expression was still calm, or rather, he was already numb. He was disheartened. Like Huaishir, after understanding the nature of the eternal frost furnace, he could naturally understand what the so-called immortal machine was. What's more, before this, he knew far more than Huaishir, and the impact he felt was even greater. The last glimmer of hope was completely destroyed. Perhaps by using it, there was still a possibility of saving Kandra. But what was the point of that? Would he personally turn his adoptive father into a monster of eternal pain? Everything that happened in the village of Dusk repeated itself. After gambling everything for a glimmer of hope, when the truth was revealed, it ushered in the destruction. After losing the hope of saving Kandra, Ogiest no longer had the motivation to continue acting and rebel. Just by looking at those empty eyes, Huaishir knew what kind of abyss of pain he was wandering in now. They did not desire to continue living. Instead, they desired a clean end to the match and a judge. To end it all, in silence, Huaishir pulled out the sword of virtue, slashed down, and then stopped abruptly. The blade stopped above Ogiest's neck. A few centimeters down, it could easily cut through the gap between the cervical vertebrae, delicately disassemble the bones and muscles, and bring him a quick end in death. But death didn't come. Huaishir slowly raised the blade. "Live, Ogiest," he said. "You have to pay for everything you've done." Ogiest looked up at him and couldn't help but sneer. "Where did this pity come from? Your Excellency, Judge?" He asked mockingly. "What's the point of sparing my life? Or do you think death is too gentle for what I've done, and you want me to suffer in prison and live in hell?" "It's meaningless," he said. "I'm already in there, I know." Huaishir looked at him and suddenly asked, "Do you know how I came out of those records? You should have seen it the moment it was activated, right? Those fantasies. I went deeper than you. Those records entangled with me are more than you can imagine. I'm not far from assimilation." In silence, Ogiest heard Huaishir's answer. "It was Kandra who saved me." He froze on the spot, his eyes wide open in shock. "He's still conscious, Ogiest. He knows what you've done, and he understands why you've done it. But at the moment when the eternal frost furnace was activated, he sacrificed his last hope of returning to the human world to save me. Unfortunately, Ogiest, even if you can use the immortal machine now, you can't save him. He's already dead. While Ogiest was in a daze, Huaisher lowered his head and told him seriously, I didn't understand until then that the reason why he lingered was not because he wanted to live, but because he couldn't let go of you. At the moment when Kandra left the human world, Huaisher clearly saw his last silent opening and closing of his lips. Those were the last words he left behind. I'm sorry. Was this an apology to Huaisher or his last words to Ogiest? Maybe it was both. He couldn't stop his adopted son from falling into despair, nor could he save the pain and torture in this hell. The man left his last apology and welcomed his end with a smile. But there was one thing that Huaisher could be sure of. Until his death, Kandra never regretted his actions. He didn't regret being swallowed by hell in place of Ogiest. He also didn't regret sacrificing his last hope to save Huaisher. He'd rather let himself fall to that level forever than let you make such a mistake. Huaisher's blade fell again, breaking the shackles on Ogiest. This is the second time he's saved you. Don't let down his good intentions. At that moment, the elder subconsciously put his hand on the handle of the scimitar, guarding against Ogiest's desperate struggle. But the man was still in a daze. He just looked at Huaisher in a daze. After a long time, his expression twitched. He didn't know whether he was crying or laughing. It was as if his torn soul was pieced together again. He had regained his freedom, but the pain was as if he had lost everything. He cried silently. If you want a trial, go to the Grand Master and the Purser. They will judge what you've done, but I won't. I have more important things to do. Huaisher waved his hand to disperse the blade and stretched out his hand. Give me the Nibelungen, and you can go. Ogiest didn't say anything more. He raised his palm, and the dim Nibelungen ring on his index finger slowly dissipated. In a flash, it appeared on Huaisher's 10 fingers. In an instant, the sleeping frost giant army was connected to young Master Ming's sacred mark. The dim ring glowed with a blazing light. With Huaisher's advance, a cold winter wind suddenly swept in front of the undead army. The sleeping frost giants walked out of the cold wind and respectfully half-knelt on the ground, waiting for orders from their superiors. Right in front of Huaisher, the shell of the huge tower peeled off layer by layer and fell to the ground with a roar, revealing the complicated machinery and countless changing structures. Between heaven and earth, the central tower was completely unfurled. Dozens of bridges connected the flying modules and buildings to each other, forming this eternal miracle. Endless flames rose from the top of the eternal frost furnace, dispelling the blood rain and the burning wind that shrouded the whole hell, tearing apart the eternal dusk. Grass and trees multiplied, all things grew, and a sweet smell blew in the wind. Amidst the endless wails of despair, an extremely beautiful paradise had descended upon this place. The kingdom of heaven was built on hell. Let's go, everyone. Huaisher looked back at the army behind him and told them, it's time to end it. Since we're already late, don't let people wait too long. Whether it was this war or the painful past, everything would come to an end. It was at that moment, in the frame of the iron crystal throne, on the cover of the empty book, pitch black ink finally appeared, crisscrossing, and an invisible pen wrote the title, laying the foundation of the miracle. Les Miserables. Chapter 590. At this moment, in the clouds, on the bridge of Ivy's giant flying ship, hundreds of huge monitors enveloped the entire battlefield, reflecting all the changes and conflicts. With the opening of the 4 gates, countless teams poured into the central tower and rushed to the battlefield, fighting for space with their opponents inch by inch. But on the big screen in the middle, an excessively young face appeared. When the frivolous smile on his face dissipated, he became completely different from before. His dark eyes were calm and deep, as if reflecting a bottomless abyss. Just like an evil dragon, so scary. Panned alongside, It seems that we are really unlucky to encounter such an enemy. Behind him, Harley Quinn, who had just recovered from his injury, could not help but shake his head. When we encountered the ivory tower, we knew how bad our luck was, right? He scratched his head and sighed helplessly. Mr. Pandalong, we won't lose, right? Lose? Pandalong squinted and looked over. Harley Quinn, if you put a little more effort into probability, you wouldn't say such stupid things. Please don't make it difficult for a language teacher to learn mathematics, okay? Harley Quinn shook his head and bowed. Just like the clown in his code name, he bowed to the master in front of him and sincerely asked for advice. Honorable old sir, what do you think of the victory and defeat in front of you? Originally, it would be 70 to 30. Who is 70? He asked subconsciously. Pandalong did not even bother to answer. Harley Quinn's eyes widened. Then won't we lose for sure? Our enemy is the ivory tower, the last remaining light of celestial genealogy, the giant that dominated the entire academic world for 110 years, the behemoth that made the Imperial University of Rome bow down to. In the iron crystal is the great grandmaster of the world, the incarnation of miracles that walk on earth. Our next opponent is the Frost Giant Legion, led by the youngest anointed person in history, a military officer with an internal rating of S-class by the Asian Astronomical Association. Pandalong asked doubtfully, challenging such a person, why do you think we can't possibly lose? Harley Quinn was stunned and looked around. This was because Pandalong's voice was not concealed at all. It had even spread to everyone's ears. The busy members turned around in confusion and looked at the old man's back. What's so surprising about it? The old man also looked back at them and asked indifferently, did we come here to lose? Could it be that we have persevered until now, just to surrender? From Rome to London and then to America, the long journey of displacement, division, struggle, poverty, and hunger. 400 years of suffering did not defeat us. Even today, we still stand on the shoulders of giants. Back then, the sages who established the name of the Ivy League blazed a path through thistles and thorns and finally sent us here. Don't say stupid things like returning home whenever you see a tall mountain. The skinny old man opened his mouth and roared at his subordinates like a lion. We have to walk the rest of the way by ourselves. Will we lose? Would it fail? Or was he afraid of being humiliated and ridiculed? Could it be that such an insignificant thing had any value to be talked about? What's really worth pursuing? Can we not do it just because we will lose? This is just the first step. Even if we lose, there will be a second step, a third step. As long as we don't die, the challenge will continue, not only because we are afraid of the anger of the sages, but also not because we are worried that the future generations will ridicule us. It is for the noble dream that we represent that has been passed down for 357 years. Even if the enemy is an invincible grandmaster, as long as the soul of the seeker exists, we will not bow under the shadow of the truth. In the dead silence, Pandalong opened his eyes wide. His old eyes seemed to be burning with the wildfire of inheritance as he stared at every face. So, stick out your chest, everyone, and don't lower your heads. He raised his head and solemnly told everyone here, we have done what we can do and what we could not do in the past. After such a long chase, we are finally standing on the same starting line as our opponents. Regardless of success or failure, our efforts will not be in vain. Because one day, the pursuit of your life and mine will become a new cornerstone, and let the monument of the Ivy League rise above the White Tower. He said, victory will belong to us in the end. The moment Pandalong raised his hand and clenched his fist, the thin, dead silence was broken by 100,000 times the surging enthusiasm. The sound of whistling was like thunder bursting forth from the thin, old man thousands of meters high in the sky. The atmosphere that had gradually become tense became extremely restless at this moment. Wildfires were ignited in those fanatical eyes. And this announcement was also transmitted to the ears of every Ivy League member on the battlefield through different methods, causing this noble dream that had been passed down for nearly 400 years to reverberate in everyone's hearts, dispelling all the hesitation and uneasiness. Surrounded by countless thunderbolts and storms, the light of the otherworldly underworld once again spread out in all directions. The miracle from America traveled through hell, bringing with it the truth from America. After waiting for too many years, those souls that thirsted for victory once again challenged the unattainable opponent. For victory. When a mastermind of the war chip took over the command of the entire battlefield, Pandalong finally handed over the authority at hand and went through the elevator to the login area. After a short wait, he asked the person next to him, "How's Liz?" "She has arrived at the battlefield, and she's in great condition." Harley Quinn tilted his head and glanced at the display on his arm. He raised his eyebrows. "Also, she asked me to tell you, everything is good, but it's too long-winded. Next time, please simplify it to less than 10 seconds. Pandalong was stunned for a moment. Then he immediately laughed. "That's too much to ask." As the elevator door opened, the hurricane of the deck area swept over. A dark aircraft was at the end, waiting for a long time. In the pilot's seat, the colonel smoked his last cigarette and looked back at Pandalong sitting in the seat. He frowned. "Old man, are you sure you want to go up personally? It doesn't matter if you're not there. The battlefield is not your classroom. The students have already gone to the battlefield. As a teacher, I have to walk in the front and set an example." Pandalong put on his helmet and showed a mocking smile under the mask. "Don't show off your resume to the old paratroopers from the Battle of Baghdad. Kid, if you want me to admit that I'm old, it's still 10 years too early." Yes, that's right. He hasn't aged yet, and he can still move forward. The giants carrying the ivy haven't fallen yet. Is that so? In the iron crystal seat, the chief engineer looked down at the report that was submitted. All the members of the troop had appeared on the battlefield 3 minutes ago, and that group of ivy guys seemed to have taken an aphrodisiac. They were panting heavily and rushing forward without any regard for their lives. The scholar team and the exploration team were caught off guard by this group of guys, and the cryogenic cabin was almost not enough. The chief engineer scratched his head in distress. It seems that those guys are really going all out. After being blocked by the ivory tower for so many years, no matter who it is, they will be anxious, right? The purser calmly looked at the screen in front of him and adjusted the index. To ensure the stability of the Heavenly Kingdom array and maintain the mystic apparatus, too much power was operating in the iron crystal seat, causing this huge submarine to become a powder keg. As long as it lost its balance slightly, it would probably collapse. Not only would the newborn Heavenly Kingdom record die in the womb, but the Grand Master would probably be seriously injured. Without the help of Utopia's mainframe and the 3 wise men, such a huge mystic apparatus was still too difficult for an individual. He had to use all his energy to deal with it, and had no time to care about anything else. The chief engineer's task was also not easy, but he couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the purser's leisurely expression. He was even taking a break from his work and making tea on the spot with a stopwatch. "Can't you be a little nervous?" "What's the use of being nervous? Since I can't roll on my sleeves and rush down to beat them up, I might as well drink tea here and cultivate my mind." The purser took a teapot and a scale from the laboratory and focused on calculating the amount of tea leaves in micrograms. He wrote down a row of formulas on the paper that had been ground into powder to calculate the effect of the tea leaves' age on the final quality of the soup. Finally, after accurate calculation, the tea leaves were ground into powder, more than 10 times the usual amount, plus a bunch of things that should not appear in the teapot, and put them into the boiling water and covered the lid. Next, there was only waiting filled with anticipation. Soon, 2 cups of alchemy medicine that had been highly purified by the alchemy cauldron and had become a stimulant to a certain extent were placed in front of the chief engineer. Just by looking at the dark color, he knew that nothing good would happen after drinking it. "Want some?" The purser invited expectantly. The chief engineer picked up the teacup. Just by smelling it, he had the illusion of reliving his life. He began to wonder if this old man had been bribed by the other party and had begun to poison the iron crystal seat. Why is it that after so many years, your skills haven't improved at all? Next time, I'll definitely... He hesitated again and again, but in the end, he did not have the courage to try. He even tried to lean back a little bit to get away from the teacup. Didn't you say the same thing last time? Last time is different from this time. The chief engineer rolled his eyes and finally asked, "Are you really not going to do anything?" "I'm not doing anything." The purser sipped his poison-grade tea and calmly replied, "Since there's a voice in the iron crystal seat, there should not be a second one. There only needs to be one protagonist on the stage. All the interference from us behind-the-scenes personnel will have unpredictable consequences for the secret instrument that is in the end of the story stage." As he spoke, he looked up and asked, "If the murder in the locked room was solved by a roadside tea seller in the end, the readers won't buy it, right? When all the causes and effects are connected, any mechanical god summoning will cause irreparable damage to the story itself." "Forster, I know you don't care about our agreement with the Ivy League, but the more urgent the situation is, the more patience we have to have." "This again, what else? Since we have promised something, we must do it. Whether it's with the enemy or with ourselves, a magnanimous life should be like this." The purser pushed the teacup over, looked into his eyes, and told him, "Come, have some tea." The corner of Forster's eyes twitched violently. Under the gaze of his old friend, his scalp went numb. "Let's hope everything goes smoothly." He sighed, picked up the teacup, raised his head, and drank it in one gulp. In front of his eyes, countless illusions began to appear. In this sudden bitterness, he finally understood something. Some damn agreements, it actually did not matter if he did not keep them. Unfortunately, it was too late. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.